the horn, and we're going to change it. And we haven't done this in a while. We want to let everyone, we want to learn who all's here, give everyone a chance to talk and say what they're doing in privacy, etc. So please, Ted, lead us off.
Yeah, hey, thanks everybody. So appreciate being on this morning, and thank you, Harvey, for coordinating these as always. You know, I really do want to say, Harvey does a lot of work. He does all the coordination for these behind the scenes. I really don't do much of anything on these, and really want to thank Harvey for pulling these together. These, as you'll see today, especially for the presentation session we have coming up, etc. These are very informative. But one of the things we like the most about these, and that I want to transition into is Harvey and I talked about earlier this week, because they do run from 9 to approximately noon. It can be, informal. Everybody has the chance to unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question or have a comment or a suggestion. We kind of wanted to run around the horn this morning and let everybody introduce themselves. We find that a lot of people that join these Privacy Saturday sessions, a lot of them come back every week, every month. My apologies. Seems like a week. Time goes by so fast, but so it's good to hear from everybody and know what they do, and I know we have some new people as well, and I'm sure they want to know who everyone is. So I'll kick it off, but before I do, just as a reminder, I think we're going to switch these over to webinars next year. We've had a real issue with the meetings. They don't capture the email ID when you log in. All we get is your name, and some people, without knowing, they'll only put maybe a first name or something like that. And we want to make sure we can get you CPE credit, especially when you're talking up to 3 CPEs. So please send your email to me in a chat, and you don't need to send it to everybody if you're worried about privacy. This is a Privacy Saturday session, but please send your email to me, and that way when the meeting's over, I get those chat notes and we reconcile that, and we make sure that everyone that's here does get CPE credit. So please don't forget that. I'll try to mention it once or twice more through the day, but please don't forget to send me your email, just so we can ensure that we get you credit. So with that, I'm going to start off, and then and then we'll start passing the baton around. But I would like to quickly go around and just, if you or feel up to it, introduce yourself and tell us maybe what you do, who you work for, and what you enjoy about the Privacy Saturday sessions. We'll try to keep it brief because we have about 40 people on here today, so we definitely want to get to our content. But let me start off. I'm Ted Sherrill I'm the president of the current ISACA chapter of the Greater Houston chapter, and been president, gosh, it seems like a week, but it's actually been right at about a year now. And so that's what I do. And then for my day job, I cover security for Oracle Corporation for both cloud and on premises. So that's what I do. So Harvey, I'm gonna pass it over to you so you can do an intro. I probably caught him. He probably, see, Harvey's used to me talking a long time, so he probably went to get breakfast and
I went to get a water. What did I miss? I apologize. What did I miss?
No, you knew once I started talking, you thought it was going to be a long time.
I did not.
I just did a quick intro, so I was passing the ball over to you so you could do an intro.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. So I'm Harvey Nusz, work with Capgemini in privacy, boomeranger there, and immediate past president of ISACA, and very much involved in the chapter, very much glad to have started this before the pandemic and now through TED to be able to keep this going. I think this is very important on the Privacy Saturday mornings because we are in a privacy revolution. And sometimes people don't always realize that because of the pandemic, but we are. So glad to be here. Please, who wants to go next? Thank you, Ted. Well,
Good morning. This is Joyce Irvin. I support the ISACA Greater Houston chapter. I'm on the board. I'm on the membership person. And that's it. Have a good day.
Thank you, Joyce.
Yeah. So I'm Sesh Vaidyula. I'm again a member of ISACA Houston chapter board. I'm also a partner at Templar Shield, helping clients implement GHC integrated risk management programs. And also I focus on helping organizations implement privacy, cybersecurity.
Thank you for joining us, Sesh, and you're on our panel today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jean, do you want to go next?
Hi, good morning. This is Jean Swan. I'm working with the ISACA Greater Houston chapter as the chapter admin. My background is also in technology, and more recently, I've been working with different associations doing association management. So thank you for having me today.
I'm glad you're here. Always appreciate it. Lynn Robert Carter, you're up early. You're in Phoenix, I think.
Absolutely.
You and I worked together on the IEEE. You're one of the leaders on that of the DevOps. So
Yes.
So talk to us for a few.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an amazing group of people, and thank you so much, Harvey, for inviting me to come a couple times. When I saw this topic, I just had to sit in. I'm primarily an educator as a day job, doing consulting work, helping universities produce curricular assets. I'm really unhappy with our focus on computer technologies up through about the 1970s. That's what gets taught in most universities. We don't do anything in the undergraduate curriculum that's beyond about 1980. There's nothing about introductory programming, buffer overflow. We don't even teach it. We don't teach the common weakness things that were killing us today. And so get off my soapbox, but I care very much about this topic, and we need to get it into the educational system. And by the way, we need to start in grade school and high school, not college, because there's a number of people getting into programming now who have 10 to 15 years of experience programming by the time they graduate. And if the universities aren't teaching them, where are they getting all this? They're getting into grade school, they're getting in high school, and those teachers don't know what they're talking about. So at least most of them don't. There's a number of them who are really very good at it, but the challenge is they're not required. It's not no certification, no licensing, nothing. And so therefore, we get some very strange results showing up on our university. I'll get off the box. Thank you, ma'am.
No, glad you're here. Mr. Lawless, you had some,
This is George Lawless up in Livingston.
Please go.
I'm at Rainbow End in RV. I'm retired. I have an inactive CISA and CISM, and it had an IAPP privacy background. Unfortunately, the way the government works is that's not very useful inside the government. It would have been better in the private industry, but I spent over 40 years in as a federal government contractor. Got unbelievable stories. A lot of exactly what the previous speaker was talking about is one of the biggest problems is people will get trained in a CISM or CISA or whatever, but they don't know the tools. They've never programmed. So they really can't run the tools that the government provides them. And then they don't have the training in the government because the government people have taken the training. It's a long story. Anyway, I will get off my soapbox. I'm glad to be here this morning.
Glad to have you. And Cheryl Jackson, you have had a tremendous career in security, a long time with HP. Talk to us this morning. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I actually started in security in 1981 with with iron we couldn't lift. And so I really had the opportunity to see a lot. I retired as a cybersecurity engineer from Hewlett Packard. And but the last 25 years of my career I spent as a consultant. So I got to really experience everything. My passion, as it turns out, was risk management, which is when I, went over into doing some privacy work as well. And I agree with, the education crisis, if you will, for our profession, because the newbies that we were getting at HP that were just out of college, very bright, very, dedicated, passionate young people, but they didn't really know anything about security. And the technology they had been taught, some of it was quite old.
Absolutely.
But like all of us, when we came out of college, we knew it all, right? So, this is a tremendous group. I'm privileged to have been a part of it for a lot of years now.
Thank you. Glad you're here. Doug Deputy, you're going to be on our panel today. Please tell us about yourself a moment.
Hello, again, I'm Doug Deputy, and I am a consultant, privacy consultant at Deloitte at this point. I've been working with data privacy since 2017 when GDPR started to be implemented. I've been working also with SOX compliance since about 2005. So I've been working in this area for quite a while. That's it.
Thank you. Steve Wilson, were you able to get off of your or handle the headphone problems? I guess not. Ron Levine, you've been joining us quite a bit. We really appreciate it.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Ron Levine. I work for MODEC. I'm a cybersecurity architect. I've been with ISACA for a number of years. I guess I've been full-time since about 2016 and off and on before that since about 2008.
Thank you. And are you doing some work with privacy?
Well, yeah, the biggest thing we're dealing with privacy is the Brazil law, because MODEC's biggest operations, obviously we're a Japanese company, but our biggest number of people is in Brazil, and their new privacy law is probably the biggest thing in privacy. We're keeping us busy.
Yeah, very similar to GDPR.
Exactly.
Yeah, thank you, Ron. Barry Tracy.
Good morning, everyone. This is Barry Tracy coming to you from Lago Vista, Texas, here in the Austin, Texas area. So I have a joint membership with ISACA for the Greater Houston chapter and also the Austin area chapter. And I spent most of my career in the Houston area, primarily in Clear Lake and also with Hewlett Packard for a while over on the other side of town. I've had my CISA since 2006, most recently earned my CISM. I'm currently working at Williamson County in their Technology Services Department, which is in Georgetown. And I'm just happy to be here. Just a shout out to Harvey for putting these seminars on Saturday morning, and I'm just very excited and glad to be here.
Thank you. And I appreciate your contributions in the past about some of the county things you've been doing. So glad you're here, and thank you again. Adi Adewal, if I'm pronouncing the name right. Care to share with us?
Yes, good morning.
Oh, good.
Yes, my name is Adi Adewale, and I enrolled in the Onward to New Opportunity, take advantage of the fully funded education to become a project management agile certified practitioner. So that's what I'm working on right now.
Excellent. Excellent. Good. Thank you. Thank you very much. Afola Bisobulo, I bet I really didn't do that well. Would you like to share with us? Looked like we had some feedback. We'll come back to that. Andrew A. Okay. Let's just open it up. Anybody that else wants to talk now, we'll just do it that way. Thank you. Or Mona, you have your microphone open. Okay, free floor. Whoever wants to go ahead. Thank you.
Quiet here, so I'll jump in. This is Jessica Garrison. I'm based in Houston. I work for Shell. I'm currently working in a role as a portfolio manager / program manager, so a lot of IT application delivery. Historically in Shell, I've spent quite a bit of time in the security space, risk management space, and in my current role, it's more around as we prepare for go lives. Are we well positioned when we think about risk management security? The privacy stuff is quite interesting to me because for every deployment, we also have to make sure that we've assessed whether or not privacy plays a role. So I really do enjoy these Saturday sessions as a chance to understand latest and greatest what's happening in the privacy space. And hey, I've been thoroughly enjoying ISACA. Thanks, guys.
Jessica, thank you. That's a great story. We very much appreciate you. Glad you're a part of it, and please chime in whenever else you want to. Anyone else? Open mic. Go for it.
Raymond Ito here. I hope you can hear me.
Hey, Raymond.
Hey, how are you, Harvey? This privacy session's really been great. I just started Curtail, cybersecurity company recently. It's something I've been putting off for a couple of years, but I just decided to really focus on it full force. But these sessions have been great. Learned a lot about different laws and regulations, different countries, and how the landscape is really moving. It's been wonderful being here, and I really want to thank everybody.
Thank you. Welcome.
Good morning, everybody.
Sorry.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning.
This is George Arthur.
Hey, George.
Hi, I'm based in the Houston area. I've been with CISA since 2003. I currently work with a CPA firm doing IT audits and cybersecurity audits, and I have a background in accounting.
Thank you very much. Glad you're here.
Thank you.
Hello, folks. Do you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, hi. My name is Chester too, and I work for Saudi Aramco, well, at least the American affiliate of Saudi Aramco. And we've always been, I guess, big in risk management, but now we're starting to see a growing need for privacy too. So, I've been involved probably this last year with the ISACA Greater Houston chapter, and then, we're really wanting to build out our privacy practice.
Oh, that's excellent to hear. Glad you're here. So thank you. Thank you very much.
Good morning. This is Simon speaking.
Morning.
I am virtually based in Frankfurt, Germany, physically in Houston, and I'm in all the good times, day-to-day business. I'm an information security architect for critical infrastructures, and we have some strange laws over in Germany. So if things go wrong, then this changes into me being the lead for the response and the government liaison for all the laws that we have, like the IT security laws, GDPR, and for the telecommunication laws.
That's amazing. Yeah, tell me your first name again.
It's Soren.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, and of course, Germany is in the middle of all things privacy, right?
We had a couple of, just super quickly, we had a couple of wake-up calls last year. So we had the first patient die as a direct consequence of an IT failure in a hospital. And over the pandemic, we had big problems with delivering energy because ransomware in power stations, while at the same time they didn't have all the employees there, all the staff present. So yes, we got a couple of wake-up calls, and it intensified over the past couple of months.
Excellent. Thank you. Glad you're here. And along with everyone else, but especially with your experiences, please chime in as we go along today. Thank you. Who's next? Absolutely.
Good morning. Go ahead, Mario. Sorry.
No, go ahead. Ladies first.
You're so kind. Hi, it's Deborah Scanlon. It's nice to meet you all. I'm on the team that will be part of the presentation today with Curtail. And Cheryl, I could really relate to what you were saying. I've been involved in security in different forms, not as hardcore technical as you might be with your experience, but since the late 80s. So I'm here to learn. That's why I wanted to jump on early, get to know some folks, to learn, and privacy is an important topic. And I think that's something I want to continue to learn in general on.
Thank you. Glad to have you early. Super. Who's next?
This is Mario Warner. I'm also here to learn. Been an ISACA member. I've had my sister for about 4 or 5 years now. Worked for Robert Half as a consultant. Currently on a project working at Texas Children's Hospital doing the Oracle Cloud implementation. So while I'm not directly dealing with privacy and security, there's a lot of privacy and security that goes around implementing a new system at a hospital, especially at this critical time. I've been thankful to be a part of these sessions, so thank you guys for having this. I'm learning a lot from all the conversations, and I've been able to take some of the information I've learned and at least put some questions out to some of the leadership in parts of the design and implementation of Oracle Cloud, and actually stop a couple privacy security incidents from happening. So it's been really good for me to be here for y'all, be here listening to you guys.
Thank you, Mario. What a great testimony. And I'm sure Ted's going to have some thoughts about that too. That is wonderful. Thank you. Who's next?
Harvey, I can jump in.
Please.
This is Olivia from calling in from London in the United Kingdom.
Hello,
And
Olivia.
How are you? Sorry,
Glad
I haven't
to
got
have
back.
you.
Yeah, apologize. I didn't get back to your email, but I'm here now.
No worries. Glad you're here.
Yeah, this Saturday morning session has been very good because over the last couple of months you've had some terrific inputs and speakers, which we in the UK appreciate very much because we also better understand the challenges that are being faced in the United States, with different states having different regulations.
Sure.
But to do a exchange of information, the United Kingdom's Department for Culture, Media and Sport are holding a public consultation on reviewing the UK's data protection legislation and regulations, and with a view for privacy considerations to take into account economic growth, potentials for economic growth, which, for example, implies, can companies earn money by sharing personal data, right? Which is a desire for many sales and marketing departments.
Yep.
So the UK data protection regulator, which in the UK is called the Information Commissioner's Office, they've actually submitted a response in advance of the consultation's deadline on 19th of November. So there's still about 3 weeks or so from that, but that the ICO has submitted a response and they've actually published it on their website, would be of interest to read. So I'll put in the chat the ICO's response, and one can then also reverse engineer that site, so to speak, to get to the actual DCMS consultation and background papers. Because what we've in the UK, when a public consultation takes place, especially when launched by the government, they usually have a lot of good research they've done I mean, this is like your personal research team when you open those documents, and you learn a lot about what's happened, but you haven't had the chance to do your own research. So I put a link in there for you all to read, and maybe later on at the end towards the end, after we've heard great speakers you have on today, can talk further, or at least maybe in November in December we'll have a better idea of how that's received attention, certainly in the UK.
Thank you. This is tremendous information. And while we're looking forward to hearing from everybody as we go through here, especially want to hear from you and from foreign, because of the European Union UK connection. Some great information. Thank you, and glad you're here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Kevin, I understand you're on. Maybe not. Whoever else wants to go next, please do.
Oh, hi, Harvey. Sorry, it just took a second to come off mute.
Sure. Welcome.
Okay. Thanks, Harvey. Good morning. Again, for those who don't know, Harvey's my mentor. So I always learn a lot in my interactions with him. Let's see. For me, I work at started working at Dell earlier this year. I work as a program manager, supporting among many things, but including security and privacy. I mostly focus when we have a major incident. That's usually when I'm brought in and engaged to help and assist. So.
Thank you, Kevin. Glad you're here. Who else? Who's next?
I can go next. Hi, all. My name is.
Great to have you.
Thank you. I work with Deloitte as a consultant, helping from a risk and financial advisory perspective, helping clients to navigate risks. And so I'm happy to be on the call today, hopefully to learn from more experienced folks in the privacy workspace.
Well, thank you. And tell me your first name again.
Michael.
Michael. Thank you, Michael. Welcome.
Thank you.
Who's next? Have we heard from everybody? Mona?
Hey, Harvey. I'll go, Harvey.
Oh, perfect. Go ahead.
This is Margaret Green.
Margaret, how are you? Welcome.
I'm doing fine. With, COVID kind of intercepted everything, but yep. I'm currently working in risk management advisory on implementation. So I'm a consultant and have been for over 20 years, and I enjoy listening to how security changes a lot. So, and I look forward to the Saturdays. Haven't been on recently, but I look forward to the Saturdays because that fits into my schedule a lot better.
Very glad you're here. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Harvey, I can go next.
Great.
Hi, I'm Ziggy Shanklin. I'm the CEO and founder of White Cloud Security. I'm an ISACA member and also a CD PSE. And we work on providing cybersecurity malware prevention. And we actually are working on some data security, which fits into privacy. So we're very interested. This is my first Saturday to join the GHC. And I'm actually a San Antonio chapter member. We're here in San Antonio, but we've got a few of our team members over in Houston, and we appreciate everything that the Greater Houston chapter has done over the years. So I appreciate you holding these sessions on Saturday morning. And Rob Clyde is supposed to be on here today. I don't know if he's on yet.
Oh, yeah.
Rob is also our executive chair, and he's a past chairman of the international board. And his experience has been with Symantec as the CTO for years, for those of you who didn't know that. So Rob's not one of those guys that would toot his own horn, but he's really gotten us involved in ISACA. And we met him after we met you, Harvey. So it's kind of funny because I think I met him personally the first time, the same day I've met you personally the first time. So
got it. Got it. No, you're a friend of the chapter, been involved before. Glad to hear you're back. Give me a call sometime. I'd love to catch up. I've been meaning to do that. I'm glad you're here today, and thank you.
very much for everything you and Ted have done.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you. Who else? Jonathan Boyette, have you been able to go yet? And I've got a note from Mona. We need to get something on AI data privacy. And I appreciate that. And George Lawless, we got a few people with the CDPSE, and Ziggy just mentioned that. And yes, starting to use the new privacy controls in Rev 5 of 800, NIST 853. Very glad you mentioned that. Anyone else? A few minutes here, then I'll turn it over to Ted to kick us off here and tell us what's new in privacy from his perspective. But I want to hear from anyone else, because this has been really, really good. We have benefited from this, and every time we do this, we do benefit. So if you want to say something else, you don't have to, but if you want to, please do. Thank you.
Yeah, Harvey, it's me again. In response to Mona's query about the AI and data privacy, don't know, Mona, if you heard in April of this year, the European Commission has launched what's been called the first ever regulations on the use of AI, focusing on risk-based approach to understanding the challenges and risks of AI. So I'll put a link in the chat. So that can be a great contribution to thinking about the challenges to the use of AI.
Olivia, thank you very much. Very timely, very good. Appreciate it.
Oh, and Mona has replied she has seen that.
Oh, good.
Oh, great. Yes. Okay. If you have any views in due course, we welcome to hear that, Mona.
Wonderful. Great conversation. Thank all of you. Go ahead, please. Anyone else want to say hello? What they're doing? Going once, going twice.
Well, this was very helpful. I really enjoyed hearing everyone, and you know, it's nice to hear all the different perspectives. There's such a knowledge base here, so it's great that we have that.
Absolutely.
Harvey, I will to kind of kick off our discussion. What I did is I created I thought this might be helpful just to kind of get the conversation going. And again, anybody can chime in, but I put some little news clippets in here just from the last 20 days or so, mainly around privacy, data breaches, et cetera, that I thought I would share. We'll pull it up. So I'll go through, I have a few slides of these, and I'll just let y'all kind of take them in for a minute.
These are good, Ted. And Doug and Sesh and others who are on our panel, glad you're here, and keep going, Ted. This is good. This is a good start.
That brings up an interesting concept. Can the Commerce Department actually limit things like Kali Linux or something that would be used for checking for hacking and doing hacking simultaneously?
Tell us your name. That's a great question.
Sure.
Tell us your name, please.
Yeah, because Offensive Security produces a training course that does talk specifically with Kali Linux toolkit. And I noticed that clipping about the Commerce Department trying to limit access to hacking tools. It works both ways. If you don't have them, you can't, we in the government, we're not allowed, there are separate sections that
Sure.
do the offensive versus defensive.
No, I'm sure you've seen quite a bit of this. I think that's a great question. Ted, any
I
thoughts?
don't know. I don't know the answer to that. You know, I'm just really stuck down here on this one on Dickie's Barbecue.
Dickie's Barbecue, what did I miss? What's that about?
So they, you know, they're trying to settle a data breach for about $2.35 million.
Wow.
You know, so I'm a fan of Dickie's.
Oh, me too.
But you know, I put this on here because it just shows, right, that you know, privacy is hitting everybody. You know, barbecue restaurants and
Right.
and just you know everyone. So it's you know, I felt like again, I felt like these, you know, these kind of there's just so much news out there. You know, again, the Navy engineer. I don't know if y'all heard about that, but where they were trying to sell the secrets
Nuclear
around submarines. And this one about ransomware crew targeting agricultural now is very concerning. And again, it's not something you normally think about. And I want to go back. If you look at this one here, the hallway on wings, this is a really big deal, in my opinion. And for those of you that haven't heard about this, this is a Chinese drone company.
Yes.
That's believed to have collected massive amounts of information on Americans.
Yes.
Likening it to hallway on wings that must be restricted. This is scary to me, that they are using drones and collecting visual information of all of our homes, our yards, everything. You know, if you thought for a minute that America could do this in China, you know, with drones, there's just no way. Maybe we do it from space, but this is just amazing.
No, I agree. I agree. It's a real concern.
It is. And you know, Kemper, the insurance company, they've been having major issues. I mean, look at that settlement, 17.6 million to end, to end litigation over claims stemming from 2 data breaches. I mean, that's not chump change, right? And that's just the settlement, right? That doesn't count the legal cost, and which are probably equivalent. And
the recovery costs and the other things that were associated with the breach, because usually they don't just simply steal.
Right.
And so it can be, as you say, the settlement can actually be a rather small amount of the total cost of such an attack.
Right. And then the last one down here, we don't normally, you know, normally we are, you know, for privacy and et cetera. But if you look at Facebook, I mean, for those of you that know about Myanmar, it's a very dangerous place right now. And Facebook is trying to resist a government inquiry from Myanmar to share that information, which, as we know, that country could potentially use to kill people. So that's a very severe unintended consequences, is, you know, another way of saying this will probably get people killed or beaten. So, you know, that's, again, it drives home the importance of privacy. You know, the fertility clinic, many of y'all may have heard about that, but you know, God, it's just, you think of the sensitivity of data in a fertility clinic, 15,000 patients, all that information taken, is just, you know, very scary. The Yahoo thing continues to live on. You look, they're setting aside $400 million, you know, regarding that class action breach from Yahoo. So that I mean, does it not seem long ago that on CNBC and all that, Yahoo was just, I remember them going Yahoo, and it was kind of the darling. And now, I mean, you talking about just a fall from grace, and you know, and breaches were a big part of that. Not completely, but they sure did not help. the Yahoo situation. And then also down at the bottom, talking about ransomware hitting health giants. 1 out of 3 hospitals in 2020, from a report that I read, and a HIPAA report, 1 out of 3 hospitals in America last year, in the year 2020, was hit with ransomware. Now that's during a pandemic, people. I just.
The pandemic caused a lot of that issue too.
Well, it did. Good.
Because we had to change our systems quite a bit to take on the logistics of all the telemetry and all the machinery and all the tracking of certain patients and tracking of certain parameters. And so it weakened the forces. And so there was a lot of compromise going on in the healthcare last year. It seems to be tightening up now, but it was pretty tragic for some of these companies.
Absolutely.
And I know some clients, I know a client that had to write off $4 billion last year in healthcare.
Whoa.
Well, that's amazing.
Yep.
And we're having a cyber insurance. We're going to have some webinars coming up on that. A lot of the insurance companies are getting out of this space. There's a dramatic land shift on cyber insurers. Quite honestly, for way too long, organizations have taken out cyber insurance and they have just said, you know, I'm going to pass the responsibility over to the cyber insurers. Well, as with all good ideas, once that idea spreads and more companies do it, and they don't make the investments in the proper security and preventative controls, et cetera. Well, these insurance companies, surprise, surprise, are for-profit institutions. And when they're losing money, they'll either A, get out of this space, which some of them are doing, or B, and more likely, they will change their terms dramatically, which is what we're seeing. And so they are, what you're seeing is a lot of them will only indemnify up to 50% of after your deductible of a breach. So a way of putting that is, let's say you have a $10 million of coverage, you have $1 million deductible. Well, they would cover a $4.5 million, because if you have $1 million deductible, that would leave $9 million remaining. They would cover $4.5 million. You would be out $4.5 million.
That's generous from what I've seen.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
that's generous.
You're right, Margaret. And that's because they want these companies to have some skin in the game.
Yeah,
absolutely.
It used to be back in the old days in the 50s and 60s that professional engineers were the mechanism to cover these threats and losses. And companies, as you pointed out, stopped hiring those kinds of people and shifted to insurance, as you said. Unfortunately, what's happened is in the field of computing, are you aware that you can no longer take the PE exam in software? They've stopped offering it. And so therefore, it's not possible to become a professional engineer with a specialization of software because nobody is interested in taking the exam. So even though the state of Texas is one of the few that has in its state law software engineering defined, there's no way for somebody to get certified now because the exam doesn't exist anymore. So folks, we're going in the wrong direction here. We need more licensure. We need more registration. We need an FAA-like overview with the NTSB sending in a Go team to figure out, how did you do a $400 million loss? You know, especially now when the ransomware is killing people in these hospitals.
Yeah. Well, and to your point, good point, Lynn. And I couldn't agree more with what you're speaking about the PEs, et cetera. One other story I'll tell y'all this week is I was dealing with in my job, of course, I was dealing with a railroad organization, and they had detected a potential intrusion on one of their systems. Luckily for this system, they detected it and were able to stem it off. But you know, you think of what would a ransomware company go after for a railroad company, right? They don't have many much PII. They really don't. So there's not a lot of PII to sell, et cetera. So what they were going after, just to cut to the chase, these railroad companies have specific applications that when they deploy work crews onto the railroad tracks, it reroutes the trains so the trains don't run over their work crews and kill them. And this attack was looking to take that system down.
Wow.
You just have to ponder that for a minute and think of, you know, men and women out working on a railroad track and trains barreling over them, and they're, you know, unbeknownst to them. And imagine yourself being the CEO of one of the railroad companies, and hackers alerting you that they can take that system down while your crews are out on the tracks. And you know, even if you've got great controls, it's going to take time to pull that system back up. You're even if you've got excellent controls, you're probably looking at an hour. Well, what could happen in an hour? And these are what, I won't belabor it any longer, but it just really bothered me this week working on this. I cannot tell people how unscrupulous these people are, and it's all about the money. And
it's not all, it's harming people. It's not just financial, it's harming people.
Well, good point there. Good point. I'm glad you brought that up. It's really bothersome. But anyway.
Yeah, and that story too, it just highlights, you know, not only even if there was ransomware and hurting people, which is obviously first importance, but what you said, it takes time to pull the system back up, so it's all the cascading effects afterwards, and people don't often think about that or cost that into their planning.
Right. And what I would say is, to your point on that, is we need to, for whatever organization you're in, or if you're an advisor, like Harvey at Capgemini, et cetera, and you're working with a company, if you're doing that, make sure that you are looking at your very most critical systems. I would say the systems that really relate to people's safety. I know at Oracle, I don't think we have any systems like that I know of, that like if a system went down that I personally would be hurt. But at a lot of organizations, they do. I know on the ransomware panel discussion that we had recently, and our Vice President, George Crawford, was on there. And as y'all know, he's CIO and CISO at Catapult Systems. And he talked exactly about that they are, the board wants to know, what are they doing around, ransomware and attacks on their safety systems. And it was some really good points that he made. And I was glad to hear, and I think George has an excellent board, it sounds like, because they said, whatever is needed for those systems, we need to make sure it happens. And you would hope and pray that every organization would feel that way. But anyway, I went a little long on that, Harvey, but I just kind of wanted to cover some of the news clips, get everybody's kind of brains moving this morning. Hopefully you're drinking coffee and get ready for our next session. So we've got about 10 minutes, Harvey, so I'll let you cover some of your topics.
No, that sounds great. So I think this has been a tremendous session this morning. We're going to probably do this about every third time. We're going to go around like this. These have been great comments, both verbally and that everyone has put in the chat. I think this has contributed quite a bit to everyone's knowledge and concern about privacy. And privacy is my life now. I tell you, it's really fascinating. So yeah, let me make a couple of comments and then I'll turn it over to Doug and Sesh. The one thing, this isn't really new, but have been made aware that chugging through the legal halls of Canada, if you would, they're developing a law from a bill called CPPA that is going to replace PIPEDA, and it's very, very close to GDPR. So it's going to be a tremendous improvement in controls over privacy from PIPEDA. So I just wanted to mention that. And Sesh, would you want to go next, and then Doug? And then we'll get ready for the 10 o'clock presentation. Thank you.
Sure, Harvey. A couple of thoughts, right? What I'm seeing, especially watching the privacy space, how it's kind of like evolving. From a regulatory standpoint, as you actually like bringing up like the new regulations, how they're coming up. From that perspective, when we look into it, like one, we see there is an evolving definition of that personal information. So what is considered to be a personal information is getting broader day by day. It's like, because I think we live in a world where today sharing of information is common, right? Knowingly or unknowingly, we are actually like sharing our personal information. So that is something that we cannot avoid, because whether we use a phone or we use an internet or we use, forget about phone or internet, even when we are sitting at home and kind of like talking, like the technology that's kind of like enabling us, whether we use Alexa or some other things, it's kind of like driving a lot of that, right? So without knowing, we are sharing a lot of information. So that's one good, because the technology is creating convenience. It is all kind of like also the companies are actually like selling that convenience. So what they say is like, you don't have to go and switch the remote. You can sit and call Alexa and say, hey, Alexa, switch on my TV, right? So, which is good. So which is kind of like giving that convenience to us. Like I don't have to get up from my couch and kind of like take a remote and switch on the TV. But knowingly or unknowingly, we're also kind of like sharing all that unique information of us, right? Whether it is our voice or its face, our iris, or even our fingerprints. So that's what is happening. The good side of that is one, it's giving you a convenience. The bad side of that is like we are sharing all that personal information. That's where I see the trend in terms of how the privacy regulations are evolving. So they kind of like moved away from just saying the PII is more like your name, address, and all the way to like when we look at from GDPR to CCPA and even to the CPRA, the latest one. It's kind of like moving from one after the other, kind of like how they can actually like enable the consumers or the users to kind of like have a right in terms of right from the deletion to a right from kind of like restriction of that information. At the same time, like they're also kind of like having a lot of obligations created for the companies so that they can be more transparent in terms of what they do. Having said that, the way I see how this is kind of like evolving is the more and more like we start using this technology, obviously we'll not be able to kind of like restrict that, right? Because we have to use it. That's the world we live in. The privacy will evolve, the regulations will evolve more around the purpose of collecting are using that information. It's more kind of like will be more focused around it. So it's like, because I cannot go to a company and say, delete my information or kind of like restrict my information. But because like I have to go and work with them. So for instance, I'm using Facebook or I'm using Apple phone. Obviously, like I cannot actually, unless I decide that I'm not going to use an Apple phone, I cannot go and tell them like, okay, don't kind of like delete my information, right? But I can go back and tell them like, only make sure like they are using that information for which it is being collected. So whether it is my Face ID or my fingerprint, I can actually like drive them to use it only for that purpose it is collected. So the way I see is like these regulations are more leaning towards that. So it's not going to restrict the companies kind of like collect this information, but it is kind of like making sure what kind of like the regulatory checks that needs to be in place to restrict the information for which it is being collected or processed. So that's on kind of like I see how the privacy is kind of like evolving. Again, back to what Ted, like you actually like referred to the ransomware. Definitely, the focus is shifting because when we earlier look at the trends of the ransomware, the focus was more kind of like shaming the companies, kind of like, hey, there is a breach here. So it's kind of like creating a big, this one. But now from there, it's kind of like shifted all the way to kind of like how they can actually create a mass destruction or mass disruption. Kind of like, it's kind of like going from all the way to, because they realize like, okay, by having that breach, it's not really kind of like the ransomware groups are not really kind of like making that money that they need. But when they start creating this mass disruption or destruction, that's where they actually like have a lot of focus, attention, as well as the companies tend to kind of like pay them, right? So this definitely a disturbing trend, especially where we are all kind of like connected. If you look at all the clippings there, so the technology is kind of like connecting things knowingly, unknowingly, like a Navy officer kind of like having access to a Navy secrets, which is obviously like something like he's having in his phone. He is really kind of like a disrupting trend, right? So those are things I see. Definitely the technology is good for us, but at the same time, it is definitely going to kind of like shape the way we are actually going to live in the future, but also how actually like it's going to control our sharing of the unique personal information. I pause here, talk for a long time.
No, that's good. Those are really good things. Brings into play key things from the privacy principles, data minimization, purpose of use, and then security and protection around it. Thank you. Thank you very much, Sesh. And Doug, you just shared with everybody about the killer whale, not the killer whale, but the killer whale from Gartner. So thank you, and please share some thoughts with us.
Okay. Well, I guess to start out with, I just wanted to talk about how the FTC has very little power to really enforce data privacy laws. There was a recent article about people. They have only 9 technologists that work for the FTC, only 9 technologists. And recently they have lost 3 of those technologists. They don't have a lot of luck in attracting and retaining that kind of staff. They had one guy that started in June. He's already left. According to an FTC report to Congress, they have only 40 to 45 people working in data privacy. Compare that to Germany, where they have 99 tech specialists and 745 data privacy personnel. So I just wanted to start out with that the FTC needs more folks, more funding, and more little sharper teeth. Then I was going to talk about new state laws. Ohio is on track to become the 3rd state to enact a new consumer privacy law in 2021. The law has strong support from the governor and lieutenant governor. It's very similar to the CCPA, the California State Privacy Law. Let's see. A couple of the significant things is that if you are complying with NIST, if you have proof that you have a documented NIST program, you can use that as what they're calling an affirmative defense. Also, they are regarding the failure to maintain an accurate privacy notice as an unfair or deceptive practice under Ohio law. And remember, that's, unfair and deceptive practices are how data privacy is governed at the federal level and at the state level in most states at this point. So if you do something that is like if remember your privacy notice is a contract with the users of your website. It's a contract. And if you violate that contract, then you could be prosecuted or be liable for unfair or deceptive practices. That's all I had, Harvey.
That's great. Thank you. No, I appreciate it. And we had a speaker a couple of months ago who has a benchmarking software set up for the NIST privacy framework that kind of fits into what that law is talking about. And he's going to be on with us later today, so we may get an update on that and where that is. But thank you for bringing that to our attention, Doug. Thank you, both you and Sesh. Ted, I think that's going to pretty much wrap it up for now. We need to make sure we get everything set up so that our speakers can share their screens. And I very much appreciate their companion who was on here earlier, learning about our group. So Ted, how are we doing?
Hey, doing good, Harvey. So yeah, it's the 10 o'clock hour, so we can let me just real quick, let me share to just remind everybody what we'll be going through in this hour. So pull it up here.
You'd think we're selling t-shirts, but we're not. But we're advising people to buy them about the chance. Just kidding. Just kidding.
No, I know it. Hey, something to be happy about during a pandemic, right?
Amen.
So, so yeah. Sorry. So, this session's about, and go fast without breaking things, preventing breaches with NCAST. And again, you can see the description here. But Harvey, do you want to say anything specific about this session, and then I'll let you introduce the speakers?
Well, sounds good. No, I appreciate it. We're very happy to have Rob as a friend of our chapter. It's done a lot with us, and I think this is, and that was a very good presentation a couple of months ago. And I think this, a couple of months ago, and I think this is going to be a very good one because, as they point out, it goes into preventing breaches, providing the security foundation for privacy. And he has assured me, Rob has assured me, that they're going to be throwing in a lot of privacy tidbits. So Rob, let me just kind of introduce you and let you take it away from here. And thank you, and thank all of you. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Harvey, and I really appreciate it. It's great to be back with the Houston chapter. And Harvey and Ted have worked with me a number of times in the recent past. In my day job, I often have the opportunity to come across new technologies and methods. And I think we had a very interesting discussion, as you said, about microsharding a couple of months ago. And this is another example of some new ways of thinking and new methods. And as privacy professionals, as security and IT audit professionals, I think it's important that we stay abreast, not only of the latest movements that are happening in the regulatory space, but also, how do we do things? How can we be involved in making things get better? And I personally have been, obviously I sit on the ISACA Board of Directors. That's how I know Harvey, know Ted, and just on behalf of the Board of Directors, just thank the chapter for being so active and so innovative during this difficult period that we've had, and as people start to go back to work when we're in a hybrid model, continuing to make sure that the chapter has great opportunities to learn, which is certainly core to ISACA's overall mission. Also, though, I've had a long history of being closely involved with software development and have a great appreciation for the difficulties of that process, including difficulties where oftentimes bugs and flaws tend to creep in. And given a lot of thought to this world we live in where we constantly have breaches that end up being reported. And you notice a couple of trends. Most of the breaches are due to either mistakes in settings, which we're not going to talk about today, but administrator mistakes with settings, or, and this is very, very common, think of many of the attacks that we have seen recently, there are software vulnerabilities that have been taken advantage of. In many cases, we call those zero-day exploits. And at their core, how do you get a 0 day? You get a 0 day because there's a bug in software. And that bug led to a vulnerability. So I've been giving some thought to how can we do things better over the last few years. We'll talk a little more about some advice that I have. And in particular, how can privacy, security, and IT audit professionals get involved with this process of building software and deploying software in a way that we don't end up with a lot of vulnerable stuff out there where our data is stored and we're with software that's using or accessing that data and it having vulnerabilities in it. So to me, this is core. Without it, without software you can trust, there's no way to prevent data breach. It's just a question of time. I know that's kind of fundamental, but I don't know that we give it enough time and thought as security and privacy professionals. So I have a couple of people who are joining me that I've known for a while on this. Frank Huerta is the CEO and co-founder of a company called Curtail. And Robert Ross is the CTO and co-founder of Curtail. Many years ago, when I was CTO of Symantec, we bought a company that Frank had founded called Recourse. And Robert, when he was quite a bit younger, happened to be at that company as well. So I got to know Frank quite well. Recourse was an innovator in the honeypot intrusion detection space. And really was impressed with their capabilities. And I think they've done some innovative things now relative to a methodology that I'm calling NCAST, Network Comparison Application Security Testing. So we're going to be talking about what is in NCAST and how does it play in conjunction with other techniques that we've been learning over the last few years are very, very helpful for security and privacy professionals to ensure that they are actually in the software development process. So in addition to, and I'll be the moderator for this session, you'll hear me inject some questions, make some key points. In addition to Frank and Robert, and Frank will probably say a few more things about himself and Robert, we also have Deborah Scanlon, who has joined us from Curtail as well and is very familiar with NCAST. So feel free to ask questions in the chat box. I'll be monitoring it. Deborah will be monitoring it. Some of those we'll answer directly. Some I might bring up during or after the discussion as questions to be addressed. So with that, Frank, why don't you take it away?
Thanks, Rob. Good morning, everybody, and hope you're all having a great Saturday. As Rob said, we wanted to talk to you about a new method that's come up in we think will help be preventing breaches. And really just making sure your software is reliable and secure, which is, as Rob said, really key to preventing a lot of bad things from happening, including loss of privacy. So that's what we want to talk to you about today. And we're going to show you some examples of how NCAST can be effective in the real world. As Rob says, I've been doing this for a while. And it's coming up on 25 years, which starts to age me a little bit, but hopefully for the better. And as Rob also said, I co-founded a company called Recourse Technologies. We were the first company way back when to commercialize honeypots. We did non-signature-based high-speed intrusion detection, network-based. So this was over 20 years ago, right? So not having signatures, but being able to find attacks using protocol violations, finding them from protocol violations. And then we actually built one of the industry's first SIMs as well, way back when. And NCAST is going to leverage some of those same types of ideas with finding zero-day issues that without any signatures and things like that. And so that's what I think is really exciting about this. And Robert, I'm going to let you introduce yourself briefly here. I mean, I've known Robert for many years, and believe it or not, he was a teenager when we first started working together. So he's much younger than I am. So Robert, are you on the call?
Yeah. So as Frank mentioned, I've been doing some sort of computer security or software development pretty much since I was a teenager. Started off at Recourse, done honeypots and intrusion detection. I've done host-based intrusion detection systems as well. I actually was a researcher for a while, working on security vulnerabilities. This is the latest thing that we're working on, is putting together this NCAST technology to be able to identify things that slip through the cracks otherwise.
Okay, can everybody see the deck? Rob, is that appear? I assume it's on there, right? So, okay, great.
Yes, it is. Go ahead.
So, you know, we don't want to show the big scary slide, but we're going to show the big scary slide of bad things that are continue to happen out there. Rob mentioned this. I was on the tail end of the talk before. These things keep happening. We say how bad they are, and yet they keep happening. And they're probably, you know, unless we make some fundamental changes, they're going to keep happening and going to get worse. You know, fundamentally, there's a lot of these things are happening because the software just is not, you know, has not been thoroughly vetted, thoroughly tested. You know, we're trying to do things as well as we can. We're introducing various testing methodologies, but we're still not doing well. And some of these issues really do affect privacy. And we're going to go through 3 examples. There's a Babylon Health, which is a company we'll talk about that actually allows you to have telemedicine, and how you know, you can have a relationship with your doctor and you know, online, and a problem that happened there. There was a major issue with Cloudflare a few years ago. They did a software upgrade that caused a problem called Cloud Bleed, and we're going to take you through that and what happened there, and actually show you an example of that, a little bit of a demo so you can see. And then Facebook pages, and we're all familiar with Facebook, that you know, they had a breach, or sorry, a vulnerability that after they did a software update caused a lot of privacy to be leaked. And that's what's sort of common with all of these. There was private data that was leaked. In this case, in Babylon Health's case, it was medical information. In Cloudflare, it was other types of PII that basically leaked into search engines over 5.5 months, that they actually had to go back and try to clean up afterwards. In Facebook, it was other personal data and account data, right? So breaches lead to problems and loss of privacy. And these are 3 cases we're going to kind of talk over and talk about how NCAST can address them. And with that, I'm going to let Robert kind of go through the next few slides and talk about these cases in more detail.
The Cloud Bleed was a pretty significant issue that happened a while back with Cloudflare. They had refactored some of their code. On September 22nd, they deployed the new code because all their QA tests were passing. After deployment, as companies tend to do, they monitor all of the log data and performance data, and everything looked fine as far as they could tell based on everything that they could see. What they didn't know was that there was actually a flaw that was leaking information out. And then actually months later, on February 13th, they made more changes to the code, and actually it made the bug more common. It started happening on even more sites, and they still didn't even know that it existed. And after they had made it more common, it started affecting a larger number of sites. It was just a few days later that someone from Google's Project Zero loaded one of those sites and noticed if they scrolled all the way down to the bottom of the page, there was some extra junk down there. And they loaded the page a few times and looked at it, and it turned out that extra junk was the contents of the server memory getting leaked out at the end of these web pages. And by reloading the page multiple times, you could get more and more information of what was in the memory of these web servers that could potentially have all kinds of interesting, sensitive, privacy-related data in there. So the Google researcher sent a direct message on Twitter notifying Cloudflare that they had this vulnerability. And Cloudflare, once they knew what the bug was, and they were told, hey, if you look here, here's exactly what's happening, they were able to identify the bug and fix it within 24 hours. At that point, they had been running for almost 6 months, leaking all of this private data out on the internet, and search engines and places that cache copies of websites or archive things had copies of random bits of server memory that they had on previous days. And so they actually ended up not only having to fix the bug, but they went out to all of the places that had copies of this data and had to ask Google and Yahoo and Yandex and all of these places to please delete the sensitive information that they now had stored on their servers. And by the way, here's the addresses where the sensitive information was. And they just had to hope for the best, basically, at that point. So a pretty ugly bug, basically, because the existing tools that they had weren't able to catch this class of flaw. And Facebook had an issue. It's hard to find nowadays because of all the other issues that Facebook's been having, but this one was actually one that affected some people's lives just last year. So the Facebook pages allows you to create kind of web pages for groups or collections of people or organizations, things like that on Facebook. And one of the things they allow you to do is to not have it linked to an individual. So you can have a page for your organization, but not necessarily say who the private parties are that are behind that organization or that are making these updates. And so by default, it's anonymous who's contributing to these pages. And these pages are used for things where people are trying to protect their privacy. I think there was a page for the artist Banksy who didn't want his identity to be known. There were pages where people were speaking out against the regime in countries that don't necessarily value free speech and didn't like the fact that people would be saying negative things about that government. So Facebook pushed an update live and all their QA tests passed. And of course, performance monitoring log stuff looked fine. And then some people browsing through Facebook noticed that their bug was that all of a sudden they had turned off the anonymous contribution stuff on all the pages, which had been the default, and they were just effectively ignoring that. So all these pages now all of a sudden had the real name and the link to the actual Facebook profile of the people who had been making posts on these pages. And so there were people that were actually concerned for their physical safety, basically, after being outed for some of the posts that they were making online. And again, it was something that traditional testing, there wasn't a crash, there wasn't an error code being sent back. Things looked healthy from the traditional monitoring perspective and the traditional testing perspective, but there was a change that resulted in this private information being leaked out there. Another great example, this one is fairly recent. Babylon Health has an app that lets you log in and view information about your past interactions with your doctor. One of the features that it has is if you've had video calls with your doctor in the past, you actually have an archive of all the videos of all the conversations you've had with your doctor. And you can go in and play them back. So you can remember, what did my doctor say about this question I had, and things like that. Well, they had an update where they had made some changes to their software. And again, everything was passing, everything looked healthy after deployment. But the nature of the bug was that when people loaded that page to view videos of their doctor conversations, the software actually showed them all of the videos for all users. So they could watch not only their own conversations with their doctor, but they could pull up other people's conversations with other people's doctors and watch those private conversations right there on their phone. And it was actually, I believe, reported by a user telling Babylon Health, hey, I probably shouldn't have access to this. Why are you showing me this in the app? And again, once it was reported, Babylon Health was able to find the bug and to fix it. But they didn't have any kind of automatic tool that could tell them that they had this sort of issue before release.
Right, and I think, it's go ahead, Robert, sorry.
Yeah, so, I like that quote at the end of that last one. You said it was shocking to see such a monumental bug in what should have been a trusted app. And I just want you to kind of keep that quote in your mind now, because as someone who actually builds software many times over my years, and I did start out as a programmer, so I have a strong empathy for the developers of software and the difficulties in actually making sure that such shocking bugs don't end up inside of their software. I would love to tell you that throughout my career of building software or leading software organizations, we've never had some shocking errors like that, some shocking flaws or bugs. But anybody who's done it has. We've all been there in making those kinds of mistakes. And you might say, fine, well, that's the software developer's issue. It's not really my problem. I'm a privacy person, or a security person, an IT audit professional. And knowing ISACA, I bet we have many of you who do all three, or have had experience in all, as a professional in all three areas. And I would suggest that we have a ton to do with this problem. It is part of our role to deal with this, and we have to shift left. Many of us have gotten involved with DevOps and DevSecOps, and it's important that we do shift left. We have a role to ensure that security is built in and tested in our software. I think that's a key aspect of privacy by design. I don't know how you can get privacy by design if you don't have the underlying software that is being built in such a fashion that it's not going to have vulnerabilities. And that is a tough problem. The good news is we've made a lot of progress over the years of how to build software right. I often have CEOs and others come to me who say, I want to go faster. I want to get releases out quicker. And I just need my team, my engineering team, to build the software quicker. But I don't want it to have lots of flaws. And there's the conundrum. How do you go fast and not break things, is the title of this set. This is part of the answer. We are part of the answer. If we can shift left earlier into the software development process, using the tools that many development organizations are already adopting, or if not adopting, they're on a journey to adopt them, in particular DevSecOps, and ensure that security is included in the DevOps CI/CD pipeline. And in particular, that security effort is such that you're not going to end up with vulnerabilities, that there are methods that are in place to detect those vulnerabilities. Now, we've had some types of application security testing around for a while that we can include in our CI/CD. In particular, static application security testing. And Frank and Robert will go over what this is exactly, so you have a good definition of that. But I would suggest that's kind of, table stakes to have SAST. You should definitely have that. You might also look at DAST, or dynamic application security testing, and maybe IAST, or interactive application security testing. The latter can be kind of difficult because it often involves code changes, and it can be hard for organizations to adopt it because it can be sometimes a little difficult to manage in the process. So you will see organizations choose not to do the latter, and some may choose for similar reasons, depending on what they're looking at, not to do DAST. But you should at least be asking the questions. Are you looking at these things? Definitely need to have the SAST in the equation. And as I said, we'll go through and define each of these. But I would suggest even with these, we're missing something. And we need to consider additional application security testing that might be required. In particular, what we're missing is a way to know that the network behavior of the application after you make changes only has the expected changes in it, and we haven't introduced other things, because it is through the network that bugs are exploited. That is where most of the vulnerabilities get exploited. If there's no network level interaction, it's hard for data to leak out. So it is kind of core to know that the network behavior is what we expect. And with that, I'll turn it over to Frank, and he can talk a little bit more about what this piece that's usually missing and what we can do about it.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So yeah, what is missing is what we think, NCAST is network comparison application security testing. As Rob said, we're really not looking at how, behavior, what is the software doing? What is it going to do? We don't really have a good idea about that. And Rob talked about SAST and, static application security testing, sort of comparing code. And I like to use a biological analogy. That's sort of like, if you're familiar with the biological term genotype and phenotype, you're actually looking at the code of in comparing line by line of what's changed in the code. Well, that's great. That actually is the actual software code itself, and sort of the analogy there is the genetic code. But my genes maybe said I should have been really tall, but I didn't get tall, right? The phenotype, actually how things manifest in this case is that's how tall I actually am. And with software, how does it actually behave? It may be coded one way, but how does it actually behave? And that's really what NCAST is about. And so there's a lot of other techniques out there to try and help find when software goes bad. We log our software, we look at performance monitoring, but those miss bugs, and a lot of times, most of the time, those are talking about after the fact issues, right? So my software failed. Gee, let me look at the logs and see why it failed. Kind of already have the problem at that point. And really a lot of approaches to sort of looking at what's going wrong out there are, let me see statistically what I think might happen in the future, and say, instead of saying, oh, deterministically, this failed now. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that, what that means. And so with NCAST, really, it's a every service out there is every network service is a software package that has inputs and outputs, right? Things are coming into the service and it's returning something. And the change has to be, any changes are manifest in a, as a difference in that response. So if we're looking at one version, let's say you have an existing version that's in production, and now you want to upgrade that, or you've made some changes, you're adding something new, and you want to put that into production. What are those differences? What are they going to look like? How is that new software going to perform? And by definition, according to NCAST, that's going to show as a network change. And that will and those network changes are things that you either meant to put in there and that you have documented, as the third point here talks about, or they're things that may go wrong. And with NCAST, you'll be able to see those earlier, and as Rob said earlier, shift left and find those. And actually the last point here is to be able to find the unknown unknowns, and be able to find those, the 0 days, if you will, be able to find those before you release, before you have these Facebook pages problems and the Babylon Health problem and the Cloudflare problem. You'll be able to treat these and see them earlier, and then find them and fix them. And that's what NCAST allows you to do. As far as where does this go in your development pipeline, and this gets back to shifting left. Most of the time out here as security professionals, we're dealing with things that happen after release. What's happening into my network? Did somebody break in? What's hitting my firewall? what is my intrusion detection saying? We're dealing with here, what we're saying is to try to get with NCAST, shift left and start finding these problems, as most of the problems that occur post-production are really from bad code. Let's find those things earlier on in the cycle. Let's find them right before we release. Hey, what is this new version going to look like? What is it going to do compared to the prior version? Am I introducing any new vulnerabilities compared to the prior version? And what NCAST allows you to do is allows you to see ahead of time what those vulnerabilities would be, but not affect any customers at all. And we'll show you how that actually, what we mean by that. And then you can actually even go earlier into the cycle and say, okay, my developers, I don't want them, I want them to be able to see these things much earlier in the cycle, so that they just don't code something and then it gets way out here and you go, oh, we have to call that back, we need a patch, or have to issue a security vulnerability. I think we've all done that too. That's not what we want. We'd like to get that earlier in the process, find those problems early on and fix them.
Yeah, I think, Frank, that slide's really core to what we mean by shift left. So privacy, security, even IT audit professionals, I would suggest that if you were building software in your organization, or you have suppliers who are building software, should be asking questions. And one of the key questions you want to ask is, where's the application security testing happening? Are we doing the unit and systems testing? And where does the application security testing like NCAST fit in? And we want to see that happening early in the cycle. And shifting left means understanding what the CI/CD is, which is shown here as an example of CI/CD, and understanding then specifically the components of that and where are the pieces that are providing the necessary confidence from a security perspective. So I really appreciate you showing that.
Yep. Now we're going to actually show you how it works. How does NCAST work? Sort of, we've talked about why it's needed. Now we're going to show you how it actually is implemented. Robert?
So the basics of NCAST is that it looks at network traffic that's going between some production or QA test traffic, any traffic source really, that's going to some existing version of the software. And it can then take all of that, those requests and responses, which constitute the inputs and the outputs to that network service, and it can send the same inputs to the proposed upgrade version. And then it gets back outputs that, because they were both fed the same inputs, those outputs should correspond. And the differences between the outputs that it gets from each of those network services should be known factors. They should be exactly what was supposed to change in this release, right? Every software release has certain changes that you're intending to make in the new version. And NCAST has the ability to really look across this sample of traffic and identify what all of the changes are, to make sure that the changes that have been made are the changes that you think were made and that you want to have been made. And inherent in that, it identifies changes that were made that you didn't know about or you didn't want to have made, which all of the examples we gave earlier, such as the Cloudflare issue, Facebook issue, the Babylon Health problem, these were all changes in network behavior of a service that was not intended or anticipated. And part of the problem is that when these changes aren't anticipated, that means no one even knows to put a test together to check for it. And that's why these things slip through the cracks. And so when you're making changes to an API, when you're upgrading a third-party library that your stuff depends on, when you're migrating between one environment and another, all of these things are events that can cause changes in the way the software actually behaves on the network and the actual responses that it gives back. And it's important to validate using something like NCAST that all of those changes really are what you want to have happen, and there's nothing undesired that's part of that change set.
So if I understand correctly, Robert, then this is giving me automated, documented change control. If I go through this process, I'm actually getting the real changes that are happening at the network level. And I understand what those are and if they were all expected or if there were some unexpected ones that need to be taken care of.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can think of it as a technical control that allows you to verify that your release notes are actually telling the truth.
Yeah, and
that's huge. I hope everybody understands that on the call. That's huge, because without something like this, you end up just relying on trust that the release notes are accurate as a description of changes.
I think somebody had a comment.
Yeah, this is Ted. I have a question. So this is for the network controls, right? Just to be clear.
Yes. Yeah. NCAST is network comparison application security testing, right? So it's looking at the inputs and outputs to a network service and then comparing what those inputs and outputs look like across the same interactions from whatever your source traffic is.
Yeah, and Ted, I would suggest that's core, because modern software today, the way exploits and breaches happen, it's always through the network. So this is really looking at where the stuff leaks out is at the network level. So it's not the only application security testing you should do. And I think they're going to go through a few of the other types here in a moment. But I think it's an important one to have in the list because of how important network interactions are when you think about breaches.
Right. So I want to go back to the release notes real quick. And again, you know, my company, we deal less on the network, but a lot more like for databases, right? And one of the common things that we hear from executives a lot is that we want more information around your patching, right? And what is the patch doing? they want more in their release notes is basically the net of it, right? They want to know, the reason why is they want to understand how that's going to impact their current system, et cetera. And we would love to give that to them, but if we do, we're giving it to the hackers. And the reality is, just as you talked about earlier, a 0-day vulnerability, you know, a lot of times we just, you know, we've released a patch for a vulnerability, but many customers have not applied that patch. So if you are too forthcoming in your release notes with respect to the patch, the hackers will take action on that day one. And a lot of times companies, for various reasons, they need to, you know, they have a backlog of things that they're doing. They have to test the patches, you know, et cetera. They're not going to be able to take action on it on day one. So my whole point in saying that is that I see this being valuable because the software vendors are very limited on what they can really provide in the release notes, but it looks like that this could provide maybe a lot of the insight that the customer desired related to the specific patch.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, Ted, if you are a larger company and a supplier has given you an update to software, you can do the same thing. You can run NCAST yourself and compare the prior version on the left with the new version in your lab on the right against your tests. And so many larger companies have such places where they do just that. And it will let you know if there are what those changes are at the network level. There are things that can happen in other areas of software. So I think it's a piece of the equation. There's no silver bullet that's the whole equation, but network interaction is really key, because without network interaction, it's actually pretty hard for hackers to exploit vulnerabilities. So to me, this really gets at the core of the tougher part of the problem.
So, and you may be going to get to this, but would this have been beneficial for the SolarWinds Orion breach, since that was around network monitoring?
NCAST, yeah. I mean, it depends on what the services they were monitoring. So there were changes. SolarWinds was actually very complicated, and so what happened was, there were password issues and things like that.
Right.
But yes, there were version changes that happened.
Right.
They were also happening on a lot of internal protocols from what we've learned and things like that. So, in general, there were changes that could have been seen, but they were on maybe some internal types of protocols that may not have been, generally available.
Right.
It was a good question, Ted.
Yeah, no, y'all go ahead and continue, but I just wanted to make that point on the release notes that they have to be pretty conservative with them. So it looks like this may help to shed light on additionally what that patch is going to do.
Yeah, and Ted, I think that's a great point, because a patch, we don't tend to think of it oftentimes. A patch is a new version. It's a new release, right? And we just sort of, say, well, we got to get this out there, but what is it going to do? And I think you said in some cases, people sit on the patch and test it more to see what's going to happen. That actually happened with Kaseya. That's how they got breached. And then they got ransomware or their customers got ransomware. They were told to fix something. They actually did fix it, and then they sat on it because they didn't test it enough. Or you get a patch out there and it doesn't work, or it has a problem. You have to pull it back and you fix it and you put it back out there again, and it, something else is wrong. NCAST allows you to see, hey, what would this have done? And then, is this good enough to put out there without currently impacting your normal traffic and your normal users? And then when you see right away what your normal users are doing with it, and you say, oh, well, this will be fine, you can let it go and not have any problems and get upgraded and get that software change, get that patch out there much quicker.
Exactly. Yeah, the more insight, the better. So, good point.
So using NCAST, one of the things that it can help with is finding the root cause or what's actually going on when some misbehavior is identified. And so, for example, with the Cloudflare issue that happened, if you don't have prior knowledge of the bug and you want to describe it in terms of the network traffic, then the description is that there's certain pages that when you load those pages, the data you get back is all in agreement. It's the same content coming back from both pages, but the length is different because there's some extra data at the end of one of them. And so it can tell you, doing the network comparison, that when you load this page, you get some extra data back effectively, that there's a mismatch in the length between the previous version and the new version. And for Cloudflare, they know that they're serving static copies of some customer's website. And so if it's the same website that's supposed to be loaded from both sides, there's really no reason for the length of that website to be different when it's supposed to be the exact same data being served from both. And so once you're told, hey, when you load this page, you're getting some extra data back, that should be a pretty strong indicator right there that that's where the bug is and what you can look into. And you know exactly what pages to load in order to trigger that issue. And so that makes it a lot easier to track down and find the root cause and then fix the problem. Really, if you think about it, that description is exactly what the Google researchers sent to Cloudflare. And that was the description that allowed Cloudflare to have a complete fix deployed within 24 hours. And additionally, as part of the root cause analysis, to make things easy for developers, you can be running an NCAST test either with your QA traffic, or you can be running it with production traffic to see all the strange things that users do that no one in QA has thought to write a test for, but can actually happen in the wild. And when those things happen, I think everybody in software development has probably at some point had the experience of, if something bad happened in production and it's reported to the developer, hey, this thing's broken. And the developer says, well, it works for me. I tested it 5 different ways and I can't make the bug happen. What are you talking about? So we have the ability to actually replay the entire network interaction from the beginning. So we have all of the packets that happened in that user's interaction that led up to that particular bug happening or that particular misbehavior in the response. And because we have all of that, we can replay it. So a developer can now create a debug test instance, and using that data that was captured, they can say, send the exact same interaction to me. Use the exact same headers that the user sent in their web request. Send them in the same order with the same timing, clicking the same buttons with the same field parameters, everything that they did. And it makes it a lot easier for the developer to actually reproduce things. And it does all of the little details that often get missed in those bug reports that make it so that it looks like it just works for the developer. And so this can really speed things up when you find these bugs in production, to let the developers really track things down, find what they need to fix, and then validate the fix once they've made it. They basically have an automated test for free by being able to replay this traffic and compare it to what happened in the production environment.
So this is, and I know we're pressing on time. We do want to see if we can show you a demo here too, but this is kind of where the array of tests that are out there. We talked a little bit, we're going to talk a little bit more about SAST and, static application testing, that scanning code. Where NCAST fits really are at the unit test, system test, API test level, right? And then there are other technologies you can use as well. But this is where they fit in the various, it's not just at test, right? But actually all along here where these tests are taking place. This is where NCAST kind of fits in, but we're going to try and go a little bit quicker here because we are pressed for time. But Robert, go ahead.
So yeah, there's a lot of current approaches to trying to find these issues that are still letting things slip through the cracks. So the first one, the most basic, is developer and QA testing, right? You can tell the developers to test their own code before they check it in, which developers do to some extent, but their goal really is to get the functionality that they've been asked for implemented. And usually if it works in the most basic, straightforward way of using that functionality, often that's the bar that developers are aiming for, and that they'll say, hey, it works. And this is sort of why we have QA departments, right? And so QA tries to then imagine different ways that things might go wrong, or weird things that someone in production might do that could actually cause problems that maybe the developer didn't think to test. But again, now we're just relying on someone else. Now we're relying on the QA person to anticipate what could go wrong or what could trigger the bug, when we don't always know in advance what that's going to be. And that's really what it comes down to when we miss these issues, is we don't always know what to look for before it happens. Static analysis, we mentioned earlier. It's a great tool. It can find a lot of issues of a certain type that show up in source code. There's certain common mistakes. Buffer overflows have been reduced by using SAST and things like that. It's not exactly a new approach to things, right? I mean, Lint started in 1978, which is kind of the beginning of the idea of SAST, looking at source code and looking for common patterns and issues that indicate that there's probably, you know, some kind of bug that could happen here, or some kind of misbehavior of the system. And then, you know, software composition analysis. We can take hashes of a bunch of different files. We can identify what version they are. We can match that up with a database of known vulnerabilities. But what if the vulnerability isn't known? Or what if the vulnerability is known, but it just was discovered yesterday and the vendor hasn't released a patch yet, right? The fact that we have this software composition analysis doesn't always let us have secure software. It just lets us identify some of the things that might make our software insecure. And static analysis itself is fundamentally limited. There's a theorem called Rice's theorem that basically tells us that it's impossible for static analysis to catch all of the bugs. It can catch a lot of bugs, but there are entire classes of bugs that static analysis fundamentally is not capable of ever detecting. And so other tools are necessary to make sure we're catching everything. And so other approaches to this, there's DAST, dynamic application security testing. And instead of looking at the source code, you basically point it at you know, the website or the main page for your application, and it loads the page, and then it tries to scrape the results that it gets back and tries to guess at ways that it can load different pages or try to send you know, send some kind of field that's going to try out a SQL injection or things like that. And it tries a lot of the naive, simple attacks that an attacker might try if they were trying to break into your system. It can catch some things, but it doesn't catch everything. OWASP had a benchmark that they tested a bunch of DAST tools, and they said the best ones caught 18% of the vulnerabilities, which is better than zero, but it's certainly not the silver bullet that's going to solve everything for that kind of problem. And I've heard from a number of places actually using DAST tools that it can take a long time to run, sometimes hours, but for some applications, it can actually take days to complete a single run and get that result set back, which is nice if you have all the time to wait for those sorts of things. But in an environment where you're trying to do 3 releases a day, that just doesn't fit into the test cycle. So then you have to decide what you're going to compromise on if that's what you're relying on for detecting these things. And then
Sorry, Robert. Okay, sorry.
And then finally, there's IAST, which is the interactive application security testing. So instead of just sending a bunch of stuff to the application, it actually instruments the application. You build it into the code when you create the application in the first place. And because of that, it only supports certain languages. It only supports certain environments that it can actually build into the code and has a bunch of checks for. And that also expands the size of your code, and it puts in a bunch of extra things, at which point you've completed your testing. And now you have a question of, well, are you going to actually ship it with all of this extra test code in it when you send it to your customers? Or are you going to ship your customers something that's not actually the software you tested? Because that could possibly introduce changes that might have a security impact. So again, it can detect some things, but it's not going to test everything. And there are certainly trade-offs you have to make there.
Yeah, and in the interest of time, we're going to just kind of quickly go over. We've talked a little about logging and performance, performance tools and things like that. Again, a lot of these are after the fact. They're necessary, they're useful, we all use them, but they're not going to tell you what, necessarily how your software is going to behave until it's actually behaved or failed, right? And so, you're sort of looking. You're definitely looking in the past there instead of looking proactively forward and being able to see things up front. Robert, you can cover this very quickly if you can, and then we try to get to the demo.
Yeah, I mean, this is really the last line of defense you ever want to have, right? The last place you want to be finding out about these bugs is from your customers. or from things actually failing in production. So yeah, that's a way to find out about bugs, but ideally you'd like to find out about them sooner.
Yeah, and and paying bug bounties is sort of associated with that, right? When that happens, it's already kind of too late. So I'd like Robert to prepare a quick demo just so we can show you how NCAST actually would work with for instance, the Cloudflare problem. And so Robert, if you're ready, you go ahead and take over. Again, NCAST allows you to find these unknown bugs or these zero-day issues, which Cloudflare, the cloud bleed problem, which once it was named, that's what it became, but it was certainly a 0-day for 5.5 months, right? It's a long time to be out there, and there was a lot of bad stuff that happened. So Robert, you want to kind of take the screen if you can?
Yeah, it's telling me that you have to stop sharing before I can start.
Oh, okay, let me do that.
Okay. Okay, so this is an NCAST tool that's set up to compare a couple things in a test environment that will show us the Cloudflare issue and some comparison of a JSON API to kind of get an idea of what exactly we're looking at here. So basically, this is running basically as a reverse proxy in front of the service. The difference compared to a normal reverse proxy is it's running in front of two services, and it's going to be comparing how they behave. So it's listening for TCP connections that have HTTP traffic. It's sending them to both targets. The target one, the staging environment, is everything that the user sees. And so the user is only aware that they're interacting with the current shipping version of the software. Whereas we have the dev environment where we're going to see changes that have been introduced in the new version of the software, which is going to show us what the user would have seen if they were using the new version of the software. But for example, private information being leaked out isn't actually visible to the user. It's only alerted for the developers, the people using the NCAST tool. So having sent some test traffic, at a high level, we're shown sort of where in the network traffic, where in the responses differences happen. So there's some differences in the headers and the HTTP responses that weren't accounted for. There's some values in the JSON values coming back from the API calls that weren't accounted for. And we have a length mismatch of some of the content that we're loading, which if you recall from the earlier slide, is going to be related to the Cloudflare issue. We can look at it from a lot of different perspectives. I'll kind of go through quickly, but we can look at what are the actual queries, the pages being loaded that cause the different problems to show up. And then we can drill in detail. So we can see for the Cloudflare environment, here's the exact page that's being loaded. It's a length mismatch. And then, as we mentioned before, we have all the information that a developer would want to reproduce these things: timestamps, IP addresses. They can download a packet capture to look at it in Wireshark or TCP dump. This is how you do the replay that we mentioned earlier, so developers can recreate the exact interaction that happened in the production environment, quickly reproduce individual API calls. And then there's kind of a workflow that people can filter through and mark things as, if this is an intended change, you can mark that as well, so that you can identify just what the unintended changes are. And then the other thing that this is showing is these JSON differences. So a JSON API call is happening. There's a difference in the content length of what's being returned from the API call. And there's a value and a key called hint at the top level. This is JSON pointer syntax. And then for something like this, in addition to having the request and all that information, we also have the response. And so you can see side by side, this is what staging returned when it got this exact request. And this is what the dev environment returned when it got this exact request. And so if this isn't a change that was intended to be introduced, and the difference here is that now you're listing out everybody else's conversations with their doctor in addition to just mine, then you can kind of quickly at a glance see what it is that's going on here. And like I mentioned earlier, you can replay to be able to reproduce that so the developer can see the same thing happen for them. And all of this also has performance monitoring built into it. So every time the identical requests are sent to both systems, you can see what the timing is of how long it takes to get a response back from each of those two systems. And you can view it in different ways. So you can see over time how one system versus the other is changing, and that there's some outliers up above. You can view it as a histogram. In this view, it becomes really obvious that you've got these outliers and something really slowed down on the new version. And then often you'd want to say, okay, well, what is it that slowed down on the new version? Well, you can see that all of the requests that took more than 1/4 of a second There was only 3 times it happened. They all happened on the new version of the software. It never happened on the old version of the software. And it was all this same API call. So now you've identified exactly what API call it is that has a performance regression that's happening sometimes, and developers can go track down what actually changed to cause that regression.
Thank you, Robert. I think if you can pass it back to me, or if I can do the screen share yet.
Okay.
And I've seen in the chat that a lot of people are referencing, the Phoenix project, right, by Gene Kim. And, I think the fundamental problem there was you actually had to have that. They couldn't find this bug, and it was really bad. And the way they eventually found it was you had to have something that actually replicated what was going on in production to see what was happening with the new version they were trying to upgrade to. And until they could do that, they were never able to find it. And so NCAST actually allows you to play the same traffic that your production version is getting, right, as the new version would be getting. So you actually have that relationship, and you're not simulating, you're not approximating, you're actually doing the actual real traffic in this case. So I just saw a lot of stuff in the chat and wanted to kind of throw that in there. Quickly, Robert, through the workflow, and then hopefully we can get to some questions.
Right, so the workflow is fairly straightforward. You can run NCAST to compare between the 2 versions of software. NCAST will identify everything that's actually changed, all of the differences between that software. And then I briefly showed the buttons earlier, but there's ways to go through, and you can quickly identify what is the expected differences, effectively what's in your release notes that is supposed to change. So once you update those differences, then what's shown to you is just differences that you didn't know about or that you didn't anticipate. And those are the actual bugs that you want to be fixing. So once you've found those issues, you can go ahead and fix the software defects, run the test again. And once you've identified your intended changes and you fix the unintended changes, then everything agrees. And at that point, you can see that there are no changes other than the ones you've identified as intended, and you're safe to go ahead and deploy the software to production.
Right. So as a privacy or security professional, I want to see that things have gone through this process and are all green, so that there's no red, which means there are no unexpected differences as part of the pipeline, the CI/CD pipeline. Correct?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And so that really concludes here. Sorry to be rushed here at the end, but as Rob just said, we really want to get privacy in by design, right? You want to prevent the Facebook pages and the Babylon Hells from happening. Do that up front. Have your code be more secure. Use NCAST to see what problems you would introduce, but don't impact your customers right away. But what would happen if we release this? How does it compare with my prior version? What's the network behavior going to look like? And we don't look at that today. What changes are we introducing? And with DAST, for example, again, we're looking at known things, right? What about the unknown things? And in general, being able to look for not just explicit problems or explicit testing. Hey, I'm testing for X to find Y. I have a signature, so to speak, or I've got a specific test. But what about implicit testing? What about being able to just say, here's a general traffic, a wave of traffic? What is in that? What problems am I going to see from that general traffic, right? And this could be your production traffic. And that's what NCAST is really good at, is finding those implicit issues.
Frank, this is Harvey. What kind of feedback are you getting from people who are testing this, from your early clients? Are they seeing this or agreeing with you on this? Are they giving you some other ideas to look at? Thank you.
Yeah, we have had clients tell us, first of all, they didn't believe that, NCAST could work for them. And then we go through POCs and we found one client that we surfaced PII in their testing environment. And they're like, we thought we got rid of that. I'm like, no, you didn't. We showed them that, things that there were problems with the new software slowed things down. And sometimes you don't think that's a security issue, but it could be, right? And again, all of this is ahead of time. And so, yeah, our clients are, finding everything from, being able to see, did I introduce a security vulnerability? Did my software performance change? Did I introduce a bug? And they're able to deal with these much earlier in the process. And the value that they see, one of our clients is basically said, my developers spend 60% of their time fixing bugs after release, whatever. If it's a security issue, I've got, things are crashing, or just, the software didn't perform as they wanted it to. And they're like, if I can change that model, right? And with an NCAST approach, you can, right? Because you can find these earlier, and then your developers are coding, they're coding and fixing things before they're ever released, right? And so, as Rob was saying earlier, from a DevSecOps perspective, you're getting the developers in with the operations guys and in with the security guys. You're looking at it holistically, and NCAST allows you to say, okay, if I develop bad code, it's going to impact things down the road in operations and security. Why don't we, get that back and do it earlier, so we don't sit there and try and chase bugs and security problems after the fact. So that's what NCAST is letting us to do.
Great. And these are, you'll get these in the handouts, but in summary, this is how we can get involved and should get involved. We should be asking questions like this. Really fundamental. Are we even doing DevSecOps, and where are we in our journey, and where do we fit in? I think for many of us, we're still trying to figure out that. As we shift left and get into it, one of our key roles is to ask questions about what tools, security application testing tools, are being used. And NCAST can certainly be a part of it, and there's some questions here on how it can be a piece of that equation. So Harvey, we can open up briefly for one or two questions, and I know it's just about time to go to our next session. But questions on this? I know there's been a lot of chat, so I know there's been quite a bit of discussion already going on the side here. But thoughts, questions?
Yeah, this is Ted. I have a question. So, so my question is, a lot of organizations, especially around ransomware attacks, et cetera, they realize that the hackers have been in their system for a while, but have gone undetected. They want to recover back, to a state, but you really don't know what those hackers have done while they've been in your system. I guess what I'm wondering is, looking at the deterministic evaluations, et cetera, would this provide you any insight as to potential, like when you could go back to a so-called healthy state, if you will?
Yes. So we've had a customer use it for that purpose before, where they had a system that they weren't sure if it was compromised or if someone still had access to it or something, and they created a fresh install that they knew they could trust because they knew that it was not yet compromised. And then they ran that side by side with the one that might have been compromised previously to see if there was any differences in behavior.
Yeah, I really like that. That's a nice capability.
So Ted, if you think about it, we've all been through this with various software products, either those we built or those we bought. And you always kind of have, hey, that version 4.7, now that was a solid version. It had no problems. Why does this versions, all the version 5s, 5.1, 5.2, 5.3, they all seem to have problems. And this can give you the tool and the ability to just run them side by side and compare to see what the differences are. And if you do that religiously over time, you're going to catch it quicker because you're checking every single update rather than going way, way back in time. But even if you go back in time, it has the memory, if you've done it all along, of what all the expected differences were. So anything else is by definition unexpected.
Now that's a great point, Robert. And one other point I'll make that I think is, when we notice the supply chain attacks, right, the third party attacks, and you started looking at, hey, I'm buying software from vendor A, but vendor A's software contains, 20 different other pieces of software from 20 other different organizations, open source, etc. I know that when I've done my evaluation on this, it's pretty staggering, the amount of third-party software that can be contained within a specific vendor's piece of software. And again, I know that, hopefully vendor A, the main software vendor, hopefully they've done thorough testing on it, etc. But make no mistakes, just as we've seen with supply chain attacks, if you can modify or compromise one of those third-party vendors' software, and then that gets embedded in vendors A software, and then vendors A's gets embedded, gets applied as patches, etc. It just goes back to your point of, again, sharing the responsibility with the major software vendor, that, you as the organization that's going to apply the patch, do your own evaluation and understand what the implications of that are. Because maybe the software vendor A, maybe they caught it, but maybe they didn't.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're not far off because of the solar wind situation from buyers of software beginning to ask questions about the development process and the CI/CD, and wanting evidence that certain application security testing is being done. And it would not be unusual to say, hey, I need to see the report that shows that there were no unknown differences at the network level. And that would be huge. We could start asking for that, as opposed to just asking them questions like, do you do X, Y, and Z? Actually ask for evidence that you did X, Y, and Z. Because just asking questions, you could get any answer and still have potential vulnerabilities. But all of these tools can produce actual artifacts and evidence that they were used and used properly. And that to me gives us something we can latch onto.
Yeah, Rob, I just want to make one quick point to his question is, there's no silver bullet for third-party software supply chain things, but it happens all the time. We incorporate, open source things, and who knows if somebody, compromises an open source repository, you're toast, right? And what does happen when we do bring in third-party software is you are creating a new version of software that will have a distinct way it responds, and NCAST can pick up those changes as well, right? So if something in your third party has been compromised, that there's a good chance that will show up in a difference with your prior version that you're seeing now, right? And so that's how you can pick up third-party problems, third-party supply chain issues using NCAST.
Right. No, that's a great point. And Robert, you made a good point. I want to go back to the point you made about the attestation, especially from like cloud providers, SaaS providers, et cetera, on what type of testing are they doing, for the patching, et cetera. I would encourage everyone to ensure that your legal departments, when you are, taking out a contract with a cloud SaaS provider, PaaS provider, et cetera, that you spell that out as to what attestation you're looking for. It will be a compromise. Understand that, again, they can tell you some of the testing capabilities and stuff like that they go through. They're not going to go, I have had customers ask us, can you give me the detailed report? And we do not do that, of course, because, that would be the exact request you would get from a hacker. But you do need some assurances there. And a lot of times, at least previously, that's been silent in the contracts with the cloud providers. And I would encourage everybody to just make sure that your legal department is calling that out and that you're getting the attestation around that from your cloud providers you would like, or maybe even just your software providers. That, you know, they have a responsibility, of course, as well, even if you're not running in the cloud. So anyway, good points. And I thought this was very helpful. I was not overly familiar with NCAST, so this was very helpful for me. I'm less of a networking guy and more of a database guy, so this was helpful. Any other questions from our members? Remember, y'all can unmute yourself and ask questions. I think a lot of them asked them in the chat, and I know you guys responded to them, so I appreciate it. It was, like I said, it was very helpful, and appreciated the presentation and the demo for that. So thank y'all for sharing that with us today. And Harvey, thanks for lining them up for us today. I appreciate it, and it was helpful. Any thoughts from you, Harvey?
I thought this was really tremendous. I really do appreciate it. Thank you, Rob. Thank all of you. I think this is something we really need to follow and take the advice of and start applying this. So keep us posted on how your development and success goes. Does that make sense?
Yep, will do.
Yeah, and one thing I want to say a personal thank you for people that are, you know, like y'all. Y'all did this on your Saturday, and so we appreciate it. I know it gave you a 6-day work week basically, but thank y'all for taking time on a Saturday to do it. I know we've asked some people and they're like, I'm not doing it on a Saturday, which I can respect. So we do appreciate y'all taking the time to do it on a Saturday. Just FYI, we get asked a lot of times, why do we do them on Saturdays? I can speak firsthand for that for myself. I'm fortunate if I can break free for an hour during the week. No way could I do 3 hours. If I did, it would have to be late in the evening, and by then I've already mentally faded. So to do it on Saturdays allows people like myself that have busy work weeks, and most of our members do as well. We can focus on it on Saturdays, but it also puts a burden on y'all to show up on a Saturday and keep working. So we appreciate it.
No problem. We're passionate about security, and we think NCAST is really an important thing, and we want to get the word out. And so we'll be there at any time.
It absolutely is. So, you know, Harvey, I think we ought to consider having them on for one of the weekday webinars that we do. So
I think so. I really do. And, you know, figure out the right timing. Maybe they're working on some new things in their roadmap that will, you know, can be brought in then, or maybe soon, but no, absolutely.
Yeah. Like I said, the capabilities, I like the deterministic, which just like we were talking about, it doesn't lend to the false positives as much as what a lot of the other, you know, technologies do. So that was very helpful. Well, thank you, gentlemen. We appreciate it, and appreciate y'all taking your Saturday with us.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Frank and Robert.
Thank you.
Thank all of you.
I'm going to stay on because I think I'm on the next panel, so I'll hang around.
You are. We want you to, and we do appreciate all your help. Okay, Ted, any other comments before we do get into our panel?
I don't think so. I don't have any. Let me transition back over to I'll put this back up so everybody can see it. So again, we're going to continue on with our privacy discussion. We want to, of course, it's open up to for members to participate just like we did in the first hour. And you know, Harvey, I know you were on some training last month, and then you know, what you some experiences and learning from the PSR, and so
yeah, no, absolutely. I don't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, keep going.
I don't know what happened to my slide. I'm sitting here trying to figure out what happened to the slide. I don't.
You were hacked, Ted.
Well, that's kind of weird that it went. Oh, you know what? I know what it is. This is supposed to be 11 to 12.
Got it.
I posted the wrong time in there. And so that's a user error, not a technology error. That's what the coffee had yet to kick in. So the explanation is correct, but this is supposed to be from 11 to 12. So yeah, Harvey, I'll let you kind of introduce the section and we'll
Sure.
get.
You hacked yourself, Ted, which I do all the time. Yeah, absolutely. No, this has been very, very good this morning. I want to thank all of you. And to Ted's point, I'll go ahead and lead off in terms of opening comments, but we have on our panel today, Sesh is here and Rob Clyde is staying on and Doug Deputy. And I believe, and Olivia, if you're on, we want you on. We'd like all of you to have some opening comments in a few minutes. And the last one I would like to speak is Mark Keelan with his introduction and opening comments, because Mark can then just take us into some of the highlights from PSR this week. And thank you, Mark, for doing this. So let me go ahead and just start. So my opening comments are around, I want to talk about the training I did in a moment, but the opening comments are around CPRA and the look back period. That's going to be starting very soon, January 1. And it means that while the regulation, and if I misstate anything here, we got a lot of people who can correct me, and I appreciate that the regulation will start in January 1, 2023, and people can start asking, do DSAR requests on employee data and B2B data, but they can also, there's a look back period where the company has to be able to say what they did, track the data, et cetera, how it was used during that period. And I think that's going to be difficult for people discovering all that data between now and then and so forth. And I'm sure they're working very hard on it. It's also going to arguably mean that data processing addendums or additional ones are going to have to be established with vendors, and also modifications are going to be made. And so thank you, Ted, for mentioning about the CCSK training I did. I took a 3-day, 3-Saturday course from the New York City chapter of ISACA by Jay Renaud. It was excellent. It was on CCSK, Cloud Computing Security Knowledge. And I'm wanting to really get into that. I took a CSSP review class very similar to that a few years ago, but Ted and I have been talking, and we talked today about the reduction in ROI of cyber insurance. And I think that in the breaches, and perhaps NCAST can turn the tide, but I think a lot of companies are going to want to go to the cloud. So I want to start focusing on that. So there, my opening comments. And Sesh, would you go next, please?
Yeah, I echo with you, Harvey. Definitely, as I was actually like mentioning earlier, so the privacy is definitely taking a prime seat here, the front seat, and everybody is focusing on, especially during this information sharing age, right? So it's like how we can actually like protect the personal information. So that's been the prime focus of all these regulations. And as I was telling earlier, so we cannot actually like stop sharing that information, because now we are so kind of like ingrained with the technology, so we cannot avoid that. But the focus is going to be more of these regulations is to see how these companies are kind of like collecting this information. Second thing is, how are they using this information? Are they using it for the purpose for which is it intended? Are they going beyond that? I think the more and more we get into it, I'll definitely say the focus is going to be more regulations or more provisions around how that information is being used, because like we cannot stop. We realize that we cannot go and ask for a deletion of that information because like we are dependent on it, but we need to kind of like put some checks and balances to make sure that is being used for the purpose for which it is collected. I think that's, I see as a kind of like a trend, especially when we look at the regulations that actually like emerged right from GDPR to CCPA to Virginia or Colorado Privacy Acts to all the way to the one that we are actually like looking forward, especially the one that are not yet become laws, like the New York one or even the one that actually failed from the Washington Privacy Act. And also we can kind of like see it's more kind of like making sure what are the avenues actually like through which this information is being shared. It's not necessarily back in days like maybe 50 years back or 60 years back, it was only through physical form, right? So somebody's kind of like filing an application or something, that's where actually like the information is being shared. But today it is being shared in different forms and shapes without we be knowing that we are sharing that information. I think I'll see that more regulations are obviously going to come and organizations have to be now more prepared. I think privacy by design is all we talk about, but I say privacy governance is something what we should be focusing on. Like the way there is a momentum around ESG, there should be a momentum around privacy governance. So how the organizations are now thinking about more on governance rather than just thinking about on the tactical or operational level of protecting that information.
Sesh, thank you very much. Excellent. Really appreciate it. Doug, what are you seeing today regarding some issues and risks that you want to make in your opening comments, please? Thank you.
Well, I don't really know what to say, but I'll just kind of say, you mentioned the CPRA. There's also the Virginia privacy law and the Colorado privacy law that come into effect on January 1st, 2023. We also have other things that have just gone into effect in this, I guess this falls under compliance risks. So as of September 27th, any companies that are entering into new contracts subject to the GDPR need to be using the updated standard contractual clauses. So they have new standard contractual clauses. You have, I think it's either 12 months or 18 months, I don't remember which, in order to convert your old contractual clauses to the new contractual clauses. And the interesting thing is that those new contractual clauses include a data processing agreement, so you won't need the data processing agreement. But also keep in mind that the UK is now separate from the EU. And so if you're going to be, if you need standard contractual clauses with the UK, then you use the old standard contractual clauses for now. The UK will be coming out with their own new contractual clauses soon. I don't know if they've said when they're going to be coming out with those, but for now you use the old EU standard contractual clauses. So it's complicated. That's all I wanted to say.
That's fine. That's great. We'll get some questions out of that. Absolutely. Olivia, I hope you're still on. We really enjoyed what you said earlier. And I think after we get through and Mark has said a little bit, I want to come back to you with some more questions. But what would you like, if you're on, and I hope you are, what would you like to say in terms of opening comments about issues and risks? Thank you.
Yes, well, that was a good follow-on from the previous comment about the UK. As I understand, at the end of June, the UK and the EU had agreed an adequacy agreement. So that's very good news, at least for the short term on that. And I can repeat earlier, in case there were a few who joined since, that there's currently a public consultation taking place by the UK's Department for Culture, Media and Sport, reviewing the data protection legislation. But interestingly, it's with the view for privacy considerations to take into account the potential for economic growth. So we have all the marketers and let's say even large government databases. What information can be put out to the public, to the companies, so that they can make profit and business from it. And of course, people want to have that kind of economic growth. So what are the measures in place to protect that? So that's just to watch out that kind of angle that comes. And I had put a chat in there that the UK's privacy regulator, the Information Commissioner's Office, has submitted a response in advance of the consultations deadline on 19th of November, so you can get a feel for how they're reacting to that kind of approach. If I could comment, there was, I think it was George who talked about the kind of Cali type ethical hacking tools that are increasingly being put out there. And in fact, I recently took a course, short course on the OWASP top 10 application security issues. This is before the 2021 just came out, and Cali was amongst the tools that was being worked on. And yes, it is true that the hackers and the criminals are using these as well. So it is a kind of an arms race, but you know, as I understand, you'll have like 10% of all the hacking and spamming and stuff that takes place. About 10% of the originators and creators of that are those top hackers, or you have a small percentage of people that are the creative thinkers, and the rest are automated tools and script kiddies and criminals who take, you just download the stuff off a repository, et cetera, et cetera. So, those of us who are working in cybersecurity, you need to know these tools out there, so you can also understand that, and expect that the hackers are going to use them. And if you understand that the hackers are going to use them and you're using them, then you can see in terms of what your own attack surface is in your own company, so that then you can protect against that. So that means you are thinking like a hacker when you are your cybersecurity analyst in your company. So thinking like a hacker will also help us to get away from the tick box security compliance. I've done that. I've got a firewall up. Okay, I've got a honeypot. I've got this, I've got that. But are you really secure? Have you looked for those little holes? And I thought the NCAST, the presentation today is fantastic. And I might have a word. I'd like to have that to play it over at our London chapter, because it's fantastic, because you got into that. And what I saw is how to think like a hacker so that you can better improve your security. And if you can indulge me for one more point here.
Of course.
The likes of the NCAST and that presentation focus on the technical side, and us techies and those of the techies, we love this. This is fantastic. You want to follow those zeros and ones and get around there. The other angle, and this goes to the phishing and the ransomware, where the social engineering skills and the criminals can hire those out. And I've heard this before in a bank or financial institution in London where this happened, where, okay, you're in the tech team or a team in your company, and every Friday you go out to the local, get a local beer, or after 7 o'clock you go to your local and get a beer and chat with your mates. And eventually you find that some people in the beer place, you befriend them, or rather they befriend you. And over time, you find that they are actually social engineering you to find out, what technology you use in your company, who's good staff, who's bad staff, so that when bad guys do get in, they know whose credentials to look at. So it's that, how do you call it? It's another dimension of the cyber physical. Usually we think cyber physical as the OT, IT kind of dimension, but I might suggest here a new nomenclature here of the social engineering as the new physical and the IT security, and how that impacts on IT security. And you see it too when, example, job adverts are put out. Companies, I was shocked, and I see our company, can you use XYZ systems? Can you use this software? We use this software. Can you do that? This is a public facing job advert, and here's a little profile of your company's assets. It's out there. Legitimately, you put it out. You scored an own goal in hacking yourself. I think someone else used that term before, so I'm using it again. On that. Anyway, so those are some points, and I found today's meeting very excellent. And again, I think I want those NCAST people over in London at some point, over Zoom at least. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much, Olivia. And you're right about the social engineering and bars. And I heard about that when I was working for NASA, Johnson Space Center here, working with the international partners, and everybody was warned about going to the bars because it wasn't just US folks there. So absolutely. No, this is great. Glad to have you on. Glad to have your input. So Rob, Mr. Clyde, who we actually met back in Salt Lake City, I think many years ago.
Many years ago, yeah. Harvey and I go way back. We've had many conversations over the years, and really appreciate, Harvey, the leadership that you've shown, you and Ted. One of the advantages I have on the ISACA board, being on the ISACA board, is I get a chance to see how a number of different chapters are doing things. We do have 227 chapters, so I'd love to tell you I know all of them. but I can tell you I've always been impressed with the Houston chapter. And what you guys have done with the Saturday sessions and just keeping the regular cadence of your chapter events going, it's just a great chapter. It's a light to many others that have been struggling. So appreciate that, Harvey. And I did want to just give a few thoughts. Love the other comments. Agree with them totally. You notice I put my ISACA background up because I do want to just mention we do have the certified data privacy solutions engineer certification out there. The exams are now taking place. Some of you may have been involved in helping with some of the exam questions, and I appreciate the volunteers that have done that. We have many who have been certified at this point, but we're now in that process of you have to take the exam now to do that. I think it's going to be an important certification as we go forward. And I like it because it's less from the legal perspective and more from the perspective of what we were just talking about. What with NCAST, what are the root causes that allow these breaches to happen from a technical perspective? It's very important we do all the right things from a policy perspective, from the way in which we implement things and the way we collect data. All of that is super, super important. And we're getting better at it. Many organizations still have work to do, and they have legacy data that is out there that is still kind of scary and needs to be taken care of. But I also worry about, do we have a firm foundation that we're building on and that we can trust? So many of us are moving to cloud, and I love cloud. I think we should move to cloud in most cases. But it does bring some risks. For example, can we trust the platforms that we're on? What about the U.S. Cloud Act? What happens if Amazon or Google or Microsoft gets a subpoena to turn over our data, and they have to turn it over? That's a risk, and it's a kind of scary risk in the United States, but it's a huge risk if you're overseas. We talked a little bit about how to address that risk a few months ago and looking at things like encryption and microsharding. And today we talked about how do you make sure that applications that are running on the cloud and maybe even the cloud software itself by cloud providers are safer, that when they implement patches and new releases, that they don't have a flaw that somebody's going to exploit to break into our backends and just get all of our data. And so things like NCAST are tremendously important. I noticed Zig Shanklin is on the call, and he's been a big proponent of something called trusted app listing, that allows you to ensure that when you're running applications on your systems, that they are known good applications and not bad applications, malicious code, ransomware, etc. and flipping the paradigm of, instead of traditional antivirus of looking for bad software and malicious code, you actually ensure that only known good code can run. Great thing to be looking at in our applications. We're getting to the point where phishing and farming attacks are so sophisticated, I would argue that they will trick even us. And you've got AI-aided, sophisticated, direct targeted attacks at phishing and farming that are really, really tough. And that can lead to malicious code getting installed. And then all of a sudden, we have this root cause, another root cause for how we have a breach of some kind, which could result in data being exposed or ransomware, as was talked about earlier. And so I think about that. And if it's getting to the point where just training people not to click on certain links, the attacks are so sophisticated, they look like valid insider emails to us, we are going to click on them because we do get attachments from people inside of our companies. That's how we do our jobs. So I think about making sure we're using anti-phishing and anti-farming techniques. Techniques such as web isolation can be very, very powerful, where you're actually doing, when you click on a link or you're browsing, that you're actually isolating that encounter so that if it is malicious code, it actually can't execute. Lots of different ideas that I have in my mind. And as you can tell, there's a theme to kind of the technical aspects, and I'm sure I'll have more that I bring forward, Harvey, over time. It's kind of what I do. I like to look at new technology and how it might be applied and how it might help us. I would encourage our organizations, I would ask the question, do we have a lab? Do we have a regular program with a few people who are looking at new and emerging technologies that can either help our organization, or in the case of some of the ones I just listed, in terms of changing the business model, but can also actually ensure that we are looking at new methods to help ensure privacy, like those I just mentioned. We discussed one of them, NCAST, today. Do we have a method to do that? And if you're a larger organization, the answer should be yes. If you're a smaller organization, I would suggest attending sessions like this is a great way to do it and learning about it. You probably don't have a lot of people to put on it, but you still might be able to pick those that look particularly promising and have your folks be able to test it. That way we can stay ahead of the curve and not just be responding, and we heard earlier from Olivia, not just doing the tick box type of approach, which is not going to be good enough. The attackers are way too sophisticated. Many are backed by nation states and organized crime. They have a lot more money and they have a ton of tools, including all the antivirus products that are out there. I know this. I used to work for Symantec. I work for another antivirus vendor as well that is now part of Norton Antivirus, because they keep buying everybody. So I know the game that's played, and the bad guys just get those tools and they get intrusion detection tools. They run their software, their malicious code against it to be sure it can pass it by. So it's a tough problem. So things like NCAST, trusted app listing, securing your backend data with microsharding or encryption, these are all just core and something that I'm thinking about. Think about the root cause, not just policies and procedures, which are core and super important. We must do those. But also think about, are we building on a solid foundation? And how do we know that foundation is solid and isn't just going to crumble underneath us, as sadly has happened to too many companies out there?
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. Really appreciate that. I think you pulled a lot of things together in that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, Harvey,
Ted, I was going to go to you, Ted, next anyway. So please, perfect.
Well, I'm going to ping it back at Robert real quick. So,
good.
Yeah, so I agree. I mean, I think there was an article out this week that was talking about, as deep fakes increase, et cetera, the ability to avoid, phishing and being compromised is going to get much more difficult, right? And to the point that you made, and I completely agree with that. So I have a question for you, Robert, that I want to pose. And let me start off by saying, even though Microsoft owns LinkedIn now, I'm a huge fan of LinkedIn. I find it extremely beneficial to learn about people, et cetera. But I would, I feel like I'm doing that in an ethical way. But it's nice to see, who maybe who went to the same university I did, or who has worked in a similar capacity, or even better yet, where some of my coworkers, I've been at Oracle now 25 years. It's really interesting to see where some of them have gone. I just noticed the other day, because you work with enough people, but you lose contact with them. And I saw the other day that one of the coworkers I worked with back in around 2007, 2008 was led a venture capital company that was the primary backer for DoorDash. So that was kind of interesting to see. Wish I'd stayed more in contact with that person for sure. But yeah, I mean, LinkedIn's very beneficial, but it's even more beneficial to hackers. And I tell customers that all the time, organizations, that they'll say, well, we trust our people. Well, I get that, but your people's information is out on LinkedIn. They know the universities they went to typically, they know the associations that they're a part of, et cetera. And by just the information on LinkedIn, I would assert you could spearfish anybody. I really would. I think there's enough information there about the certifications they have, et cetera, that you could craft an email, et cetera, to almost get anybody compromised. So back to my question, long way around the barn, as we say here in Texas sometimes, but my question is, do you think it would be appropriate from a privacy and security standpoint for an organization, a company, to say to its privileged users that they are not allowed to have information on social media like LinkedIn, Facebook, et cetera, because of the security threats that it would pose to the organization?
Yeah, was that to me or to another Robert?
No, that is to you. I just wanted to say that, let me just quickly say that I think it's great because I know a lot of FBI folks who don't get on LinkedIn. So please, Rob, continue.
Yeah, I think it really depends on the organization. I'm not a fan of one-size-fits-all policies, and this would be an example of a one-size-fits-all. I definitely think, Harvey just mentioned the FBI, great example, where this would be a good policy. On the other hand, if I'm trying to recruit high-tech workers to a fast-moving, fast-growing company that is struggling with talent, saying you can't use social media is probably not a good idea. You're not going to. This is a tough market to attract people. Let me suggest an alternative. And by the way, this alternative is one that I know that even classified government environments are using as a way to solve the very problem we just talked about. And we could do a whole session on this, Ted, at some point if you would like, but it's called web isolation. And the best web isolation, the one that I like the best and that the government, the US government actually uses, so you mentioned the FBI and others, I don't know if the FBI does, certainly Department of Defense does, is a technique of web isolation that has on the back end, and this is in the government, it's typically done on their own servers. So they've got a server farm doing this. But next year, you'll be able to do this as businesses. You can actually get this as a cloud service. On the back end are special appliances that have a hardware chip in them. So when you browse a session, it gets redirected to this appliance. And in that appliance is a chip that has a camera that can record video and also a chip that plays video. And when you browse, it actually takes the data from that browsing set. So say you click on a phishing link and now it goes out to the network, it's going to get something. Whenever it goes out there, everything that is happening from your browsing session is going through this appliance, and then it plays the video of your session, which are just, those are pixels now, and then the camera picks up pixels. And that's essentially air gapping all interactions with the web, which now allows people to safely go to places like Facebook or even very dangerous websites, because some people in their jobs actually have to go investigate. Think of security people, highly privileged users, think of security people having to go check out the dark web or something else. This type of air gapping becomes very important and gives a way for people to safely access sites that were formerly not safe. They still have to exercise good judgment which they post. So you have to have policies about that, and a zero tolerance policy about what you're allowed to post and what you're not allowed to post is still required. But I don't know that a complete ban is necessarily required in those types of contexts. But I would suggest for your privileged users, I think it is important and not just privileged, but think of every organization should know who are my high-risk users: security personnel, privacy, chief data officers, the list goes on and on. There's actually a lot of people who are on that high-risk list, and it's often the 80-20 rule. About 20% may likely be on that list. And I think for that list, you need to be sure to use certain types of tools like the web isolation I was just talking about, the trusted app listing that I was mentioning earlier, so they can't run any code when they're doing their jobs, except the code that's allowed. And there are many other techniques that can be used to help deal with those high-risk users in terms of implementing policies, including the zero tolerance rule on what you're allowed to post. That's different than necessarily the general population. But I would suggest looking at that approach and looking at high-risk users as a category, and knowing what they are and knowing what your plan is relative to those. Secondly, look strongly at the privileged users. Make sure nobody has access to everything.
Right.
So you've got separation of duties. And I always like to ask that simple question and do an investigation to verify that nobody has access to everything, and who has access especially to Active Directory service and the domain administrators, because oftentimes those people can give access to anything. And I always like a few special things that they can't give access to. So that's something to think about, how you do that.
That's helpful. Thanks for that. And hey, really appreciate it, Robert. Before I forget, because I know we'll lose a few people here right at the top of the hour, and we may end up going a little bit over, but if you have to drop, no worries. Let me make a couple of quick announcements. One, I think everybody has sent me their email, or I hope so, on chat. If you haven't, please make sure you send it to me. I only need it one time, and then we can reconcile your email with the name that you are on the meeting to make sure you get your CPE certificate. So if you haven't done that, please send me your email in chat. Secondly, I did put a link out there to my slides. And if you want a copy of those, a couple of people asked because they wanted to see a link to, they wanted the breach notifications and some of the news little excerpts I put out there. So that's out there if you want to download it. Robert, I think you're going to send me a PDF later, and I will also create a link for it and email it out to everybody. So for the Curtail presentation over NCAST today. So I'll send that out, here in the next day or so. And then lastly, we are getting prepared for this webinar series on cyber insurance. And if you know of somebody in the cyber insurance industry that you recommend to be a part of that, by all means, I'd love to hear it. We have, I've personally reached out. I have some contacts, and we have Booz Allen Hamilton, the person that's head of their cyber insurance and ransomware practice at Booz Allen, is going to participate. Marsh McLennan is going to participate, and Resilience Insurance is going to participate. But we're looking at a 4-part webinar series on this. And so if you have questions that around cyber insurance, thoughts or suggestions, people that you'd recommend to be on the panel, but especially questions, that you would like posed or answered around cyber insurance. And really what we're looking at is how the ransomware, growth and exponential growth and all that, it's having a large effect on the cyber insurance policies and how they're being affected and what it takes now to get indemnified, et cetera. So if you have questions for that, please let us know. And then, and I did just see a message, and thank you for sending it to me. For those of y'all that have attended the Saturday sessions, we are sending out CPEs. You should have those by Monday, actually, for all the previous Privacy Saturday sessions. We're waiting for this final one to finish, and then I'm going to work on those tomorrow and work to get those out. So you should get all your CPE certificates. So yeah, and I saw Andy, thanks for the comment about AIG. Yeah, we're definitely reaching out to them as well. I'd like to hear from their perspective as well. So good point. But yeah, if you have questions, if you have suggestions for the cyber insurance, please send it to me on chat. And I apologize for the break in there, Harvey, but I just wanted to get those few announcements out real quick before we hit the top of the hour.
No, this is perfect, Ted. Thank you. No worries. So I'm going to go to Kevin for his comments, and then I'm going to go over to Mark and let Mark take it away after that. But before we do that, let's have another CPE check. So here's the question. What was the most interesting item you heard in the NCAST presentation? Repeat, what was the most interesting item you heard? What impressed you most about NCAST? And please put that in the chat, and that'll be for our CPE check. And Kevin, I'd like to get a couple comments from you, please. What are your thoughts about what you're seeing, please? I hope you're coming off mute. I'll give you a little bit more time. And if not, I will go on to Mark Keelan, but wanted to give you another chance, Kevin.
Okay, sorry about that. I hit the wrong button and we ended up
No
going
worries. I do it all the time. Thank you.
I was actually in the middle of typing my comment on what I felt
oh, good.
I thought was interesting regarding NCAST and a valuable point. And Ted had jumped in to and help explore that to bring it out a little more crisp. And that was, of course, that was bringing out the being able to capture the history of changes and looking at the original configuration as things change throughout the history of a solution. So now the first thing, one of the things that crossed my mind, and that is how much data is being captured and needed to be stored in order to gain all that information, because that becomes another point and another challenge. Even though data is storage data is increasingly inexpensive, just because it's inexpensive when you look at large enterprise organizations, it doesn't mean that it is easy to deploy. So and that's and I know we have that challenge where we have oodles and noodles of storage out there, but we also have many segments of the environment that you just can't get the storage there fast enough in order to meet the needs. But it is, again, it is what it is, and that's one of those challenges from an enterprise perspective of looking at the enterprise architecture and defining a strategy that meets the goal.
Excellent.
But the other thing that that crossed my mind, and Olivia kind of started hitting on some of that, was, when you talk about recruiting, again, these are, Harvey, I'm big on the consumer side. We spend a lot of money on enterprise, but we as consumers also need to be educating ourselves and educating our friends and family and the like to help them, because those can be targets as well in today's age, and they're just not knowledgeable. So we got to keep educating. One of the things that came across for me earlier this year, late last year, was I'm finding companies are starting to ask people for, especially technology positions, asking people to provide articles or artifacts to demonstrate their capability, to demonstrate their knowledge. It's a great idea that you want to bring, and you want to hire somebody who knows what they're doing and they can show it to you. The downside and the risk is they're bringing an artifact from their previous employer, that company has used that, possibly used that artifact for their business. And now you're showing it to a new company. Yes, many ask that you normalize the data and the information, but still you're showing a, intellectual property of another company to another company. And they're under no obligation. Yeah, they're under no obligation. Yeah, they're under no obligation to keep that information private. They're under no obligation not to share it within their own company. You're not signing any contracts, or you're just interviewing. And so that's a real concern that I'm seeing more and more organizations are starting to ask that, and even we do it sometimes. But anyway, so those were one of the things that crossed my mind. Not sure how to satisfy that particular issue, but I am seeing it as a trend for a company, especially for technical roles, are asking for artifacts of past work. And like I say, I think that's also a security risk for the previous company, of course.
And it's also, I would think I like it and I appreciate it. I'm going to Mark next, but let me just comment on that a moment, because several times people have asked me to share that, and I said, hey, I can't. It's an NDA. It's their IP, like you said. And in fact, I even had somebody in one company say, hey, you got any IP you can share? I said, none that I've developed here. And I would like to see that get to the point where companies use that as a test of the ethics of, which is close to privacy, of the people they're interviewing. I would like to see them ask a similar question. And if they show them something, say, sorry, thank you, not using you, and that would be maybe a little hard thing to do, but it would make the point. So I really appreciate your bringing that up, Kevin. Thank you very much. Mark Keelan, got you on? And
I'm still here.
I hope.
I'm here. So
it's great to talk to you. Yeah, let me just say really quickly, sorry to interrupt, but let me just say, if you don't mind, could you share with us maybe any updates regarding your tool that allows you to benchmark NIST privacy framework before you go on to what you found from PSR? And we're delighted to have you again.
Sure, I'll weave it into the subject. Does that work for you?
Perfect, absolutely.
Okay, so first of all, I was taking notes, listening to the other speakers. I basically, on the number of subjects, figure I have enough topics to last till the time I retire. There's got to be hundreds, and the amount of material. That's the problem we run into in privacy and security. These are very complex, multidisciplinary areas that deal with legal, operations, audit, technology, this. And honestly, I've been on the ISA board for cybersecurity for many years. I'm the co-chair for IAPP Los Angeles, one of the largest chapters. And ISACA LA wants me on their board, but I've told them I do have a day job and I can't really do all three of these simultaneously. But there were so many subjects that I picked. I took three that I said, okay, after listening to all of these, I'm going to pick three. They're not interrelated, but three of them are relatively near and dear to my heart. So I'm going to take First one, in privacy and cybersecurity programs. The biggest challenge I see, and I've been at IT for 36 years, which I guess makes me a T-Rex or a dinosaur of some sort, but is the dramatic inconsistency across programs for both cyber, this, depending upon industry, area, function. If you look at a Citibank versus a hospital versus this, it's, you run the gamut from fairly decent to frightening programs they're that bad. My overall initial impression is that privacy programs in general are probably on average 10 years behind where cybersecurity is. And cybersecurity is probably 10 years behind where it probably needs to be. When you look at it, it's literally that interesting. Now, the inconsistency problem, I believe, is lack of uniform standards that we all look at and agree to. So you look at privacy, you get NIST privacy framework, fairly new. You get ISO 27701. You get AI, CPA, and the new versions there. You get, and it goes on and on and on. And the same is true for cybersecurity. So we have tried to crack that problem, actually. So what we did is we took NIST privacy and we layered CMMI on it with the capability matrix, very similar to what was done for CMMC. But every time we do this, this project becomes the never-ending story. And we realize there's something new and wonderful that people tell us, you should do this. So what we are doing, and part of it will release next week, is we are now taking NIST privacy framework and NIST cybersecurity framework with the capability matrix, and we will automatically overlay the minimum compliance requirements across both. So if you get through NIST cybersecurity framework and all of those answers that apply to the privacy framework will automatically get populated and tracked by person, et cetera, et cetera. We are going to crack that code across ISO, NIST. I've got about 8 or 9 of them that we're going to crack that code on to make people's lives consistent, easy, so that we can get some consistency across programs. Okay, it's been a project from hell. I burned my budgets 4 times over getting through this, but the end result people seem very happy with. So that's a little plug, but I think inconsistency of programs is a uniform problem across all of these programs, and we need a way to really get consistency. I love NIST cybersecurity framework. I used it personally in multi-million-dollar deployments. I found it incredibly useful, and it's why I started with NIST on this other one. Now, so I'm going to jump to another subject, which is cloud. Everybody brings up the cloud. Being an old IT warhorse, I'm from on-premise from the beginning of time in dumb terminals. The first system I worked on was punch card programs I wrote, as frightening as that is. Today, the cloud is much different than it was 5, 10 years ago. And I'm going to use a privacy example of something I listened to at IAPP-PSR. I get all these legacy companies coming in and telling me, by the way, I'm at a 25,000 person technical firm full of technoids, PhDs. They're much smarter than I am, but they come to me and tell me I'm going to deal with the data. So cyber and privacy, a big area you have to worry about is its data. It's not only data, you've got IoT and all these other areas, but in the data area, they're often pitching, I do sampling. And I'm like, great, I'm no longer interested. And they're like, wait a minute, why? And I'm like, because if it were 5, 10, 15 years ago, I would have said, I like sampling because my computer can't chew through this incredible mass of data. I have to buy 20 side-by-side refrigerator machines to chunk through these Fortune 100 companies' data. Today in the cloud, I no longer have that problem, okay? So if I want to chew through the data and I'm using AWS with containerization, I can scale my capacity up and down at will, okay? So I can chew through the Pentagon's data, okay? So I no longer want a sample, I want it all. And I want to know everything that's in there from a privacy and security standpoint, and I can know that today. And they're like, it's expensive. I'm like, it is in the beginning, but I do an incremental scan after the fact. So it is no longer expensive, and I have full data sets. And for the cyber people, you know, typical way to attack me, flood my network so that I slip all of this crap into the network. And if you're on a span, your cyber tools lose all the data, those packets fall off and disappear. On a tap, you're not, but that means your network's probably crushed. So that's a typical example why we should be moving to the cloud. Cloud security for AWS, Azure, and the others is better than 98% of the on-premise deployments that I see and analyze today. So while I wasn't in the cloud in the beginning, when it first came out, because it was primitive and didn't work and did the other, I am 100% in telling these people, legacy tools, the others, the cloud is where all the AI innovation is coming in. It has virtually unlimited capacity. Yes, it has some risks. Biggest risk is MFA there. If you are not doing you are responsible for your credentials when you are using cloud deployments. If you do a good job on MFA, you solve 80% of the hacks, because the social engineering hack is, I get your credentials and password, does me no good if the MFA is good, because I still can't get in, right? And 80% of the companies out there don't have MFA. So when I go back to inconsistency, they're terrible. You know, these programs need fundamentals, right? The 80-20 rule. And if we can get them to do that, our world will be happier in both privacy and security. And I've been Don Quixote on this since I got into this space, and I'm still going to be Don Quixote, tilting against those windmills to get them to go the right way. Last two, hiring. I have volunteered for years to help students, minorities, women, and veterans get jobs in cybersecurity for ISA. They created a special position for me at ISA LA to do that. I've got enormous number. I got one African-American gentleman a 250% raise. He was getting his PhD and was paid a ridiculously low amount of money because he's 6'3", 300-pound ex-professional boxer, but he also has a brain that rivals the best. He's a PhD in cybersecurity. Couldn't get a job, couldn't get a decent job. I was so upset. I got this man a 250% raise with one of my other ISA board members, hired him when I said, you have to interview. This man is a gem, and there's still discrimination. The problem we have in our market with people hiring in this is we refuse to train, and we refuse to look outside the box. And we put out an entry-level position that requires 5 years experience. When the hell did entry-level require a master's in 5 years experience? What's wrong with you people? So I have chewed out at the ISACA meetings. I had 3 students and a veteran in the meeting. I chewed out the people in the career meeting, and I got all 4 of those people interviews and 2 of them hired. We are the problem, not the solution today in this hiring and this other piece. Okay. Last little piece, IAPP, privacy, security, risk. Okay. Was out there. My voice is shot. I talked mostly privacy with a little bit of security, 12 to 15 hours a day for the last few days. But I'm still on here today because I love what I do and I want to keep doing it. And that is what I learned in that meeting is over COVID, it pretty much was status quo. The world hasn't changed that greatly in terms of what they're delivering. Privacy is still really good at legal. 4 out of 5 people in IAPP are legal. Most data privacy offices are attorneys, okay? And the legal part of it that constantly gets talked about is actually the best cover. Of all the coverage, that's still the best, okay? But you put attorneys in making technology decisions on what they deploy. And unfortunately, it's like putting us technology people in charge of writing a legal document. That's what you're going to get. You know, you get really poor quality. We need to work together with cyber operations, legal, when we're doing these programs together, and you provide a quality program. Today, we're still kind of isolated or compartmentalized too much and the programs mostly show that. The most interesting thing about the meeting had nothing to do with privacy, and that was the people were virtually exuberant about being able to talk to people like Robert and Kevin and Sesh and the others, that we actually got to just talk to each other face to face and discuss these subjects, that it was almost to the point of irrational exuberance. People were so excited to no longer just see a face on a screen. I'm one of the lead analysts. I met at one of the after hours cocktail receptions, and this woman's brilliant. I know this woman, but she was smiles from ear to ear, and she didn't want to talk anything about privacy. She was just happy to talk to the rest of us, her peers. So it showed this. My first two meetings with very large clients, the entire hour was just spent talking to each other and nothing about the programs that we were running on. They were just so happy to talk to their peers. I'm really looking forward to, this is not a political statement. I don't care if you're pro-vax, anti-vax, this, the other. I'm really looking forward to being free again and meeting with all these other professionals face to face at the ISACA meetings and the other meetings. I learned more in those meetings than I learned reading 400 pages of documentation from our peers. And I'm really looking forward to when we can get back to work with each other and help each other on these programs. So I hope I didn't go too long, Harvey. I hope that was some of the information you were looking for.
No, absolutely. I appreciate your doing this. So just a couple more questions about PSR.
Yes.
I remember one of my friends, Emily Leach, was going there and she put on LinkedIn, I'll be there and I have jobs. So I'm looking forward to talking with people. Was that a major part of IAPP?
There's always the networking for the jobs piece. My personal opinion is that the job market is better in cybersecurity than it is privacy today. And I'm quite sure of that actually, because cybersecurity got more funding under COVID. Compliance funding, it was either flat or in some cases down. So while there is still great need there, the cybersecurity gap is greater. This is anecdotally, but I'm very deeply in touch with these groups. And again, I was helping hiring, right? All these people get hired. I must get sometimes multiple of those requests a day that I help people with on a personal basis. Depends upon the day, but it's at least a half a dozen every week of the year. I mean, the hundreds of these that come to me. So no, I didn't see it really big on the hiring piece. A little bit. The cyber side, I get bombarded with people saying I need to hire cyber people, and that's when I usually chew them out when I look at their job rec. Telling them, yeah, I get 5 people for you, but nobody that you can afford is going to meet that criteria. You're in trouble. Your budget's too low, and you're asking for entry level with a master's and 5 years experience. Right?
Got it. Well, they always have good keynotes. Were there any takeaways that you remember from that before I get into a question for all of you panelists?
I didn't actually have the luxury of doing the keynotes. I was in with there was about 20 major suppliers that came, OneTrust, Big ID, ourselves, Security AI, et cetera. Because I'm the lead expert in there, I was pretty much chained to that table. I let other people come and go, but I was pretty much chained there till the days were over.
Got it. Okay, so let me pose this question to you first, then I'll go around the table to anyone else who wants to answer it. So I brought up the issue of look back period in CPRA beginning January 1, 2022, as CPRA will be in effect January 1, 2023. So what are you seeing with companies trying to get a handle on discovering their employee data, no matter which industry they're in, and their B2B data, starting to track that?
You do realize that my primary expertise is about data, right, Harvey?
I do. Should I retract the question?
Right. Okay. No, you shouldn't retract the question, but I'm going to I'm going to answer that question slightly differently. Okay. The majority, and I hope this is not filled with vendors, and I'm not going to mention individual vendors' names because they will probably stake me to the cross and light me on fire. But the bottom line is the majority of organizations do a terrible job doing data discovery. They're using legacy tools. They've got performance issues. They've got their rules, manual rules based, like the old firewalls. They're so they're, fighting a modern war with a bow and arrow, and the reality is AI and cloud technology has leapfrogged that. The look back provision is really not a problem if you apply the right tool today for any of these. It's a matter of getting through all the data. So I've got a legacy tool that's limited by the server I installed it on, and it looks at this massive quantities of data and says, oh, I'm going to sample because I can't really look at it. When if they went to something and I need to add 65 new rules to deal with my look back, and I've forgotten 23 of them because I don't know what they are. And so if you go away from the performance limitation and you go away from having old rules-based stuff, and you've got a good AI-based, cloud-based thing that can really chew through all the data, then it's a very technically, it's an easy problem to solve. The problem is there's so much legacy data discovery and other technology, et cetera. And it's very difficult to tell somebody, rip out something that you just paid, you 5 years ago, you paid $500,000 for it, because it's no longer that great. And it's not going to do a good job on this look back provision, right? So the answer is that problem can be solved, but you need to use modern tech in the cloud probably for everybody. And if you do, then this is a simple problem. If you don't, then it becomes a very difficult problem, frankly. Did that help at all?
Are you seeing companies scramble to modify their data processing addendums?
I'm not sure what you're referring to on the addendum. So let's on the technical basis, I'm looking at lots of them with existing legacy tools, trying to go back and deal with adding all the necessary rules that don't exist for any new provisions, and or realizing that when they look at the mass quantities of data they have, that their existing infrastructure really can't chew through it all in a timely basis. So they have those problems and they don't necessarily know how to solve them, because let's be honest, there's tons of questions you could ask me that Robert could probably answer that I can't, right? In his area of expertise, or Kevin or the others. It's finding the right expert in the right area to solve the right problem is a challenging problem here. And I happen to be the data nerd. That's how I got into cybersecurity and privacy. I have other areas that I study, but there are areas in this like IoT. IoT, I understand really basics, but I'm a babe in the woods, in IoT. So they're going to the wrong person to get, I'm going to the dentist to get a colonoscopy for this in some cases, probably not a good place to go. And I'm only saying those two because I just had a colonoscopy and I have a dentist on Monday. So that's why those two came to mind. But it's very challenging. This is so complex. There's so much expertise in the others that it's hard. I empathize with the customers. I think this should be done as a managed service for most entities, just like payroll is today, or MSSPs are taking it over because it's so damn complex. If you could share the experts across 100, 200, 300, 400 companies, as opposed to bringing all the expertise in yourself, hard, right?
Got it. Okay. Well, let me take this question to anyone on our panel or anyone in our audience. Are you finding companies that are struggling with getting ready for the look back because of employee data? And if you're in an industry that all you have is employees and contractors, you're good. There may be some industries, there are some that it's a little more complex. And also on the data processing addendums, on the controls that you're in agreement with your vendors that they will provide over the data, since you're adding data, employee data is now in scope within CPRA. and because the B2B is in scope. Is that causing any heartburn, any issues for you or companies that you know? Anyone, please.
I think the challenge, this is Kevin, I think the challenge for large multinational companies, especially when you talk about contracts, is that, you know, you have so many contracts and the expiration for those contracts, you know, you have to negotiate as the contracts, in many cases, as the contract expires. And so there is I was going to say a sprint to try to get some of the contracts that are not set to expire before the 2022-2023 timeframe comes about, and get good terms, because even, yes, you want to meet the regulatory requirements, but you, from a business perspective, you also don't want to put yourself in a position where you're renegotiating a contract early and not getting favorable terms, because the vendors are in business for themselves, and if they know they can get you to sign a contract early, they're going to try to get the best terms for themselves financially, which may not be, which becomes a hard sell internally to leadership to get not so favorable financial terms, even though you may get some of the regulatory terms inside the contract. So it's a happy balance. I was going to say happy balance. It's a balancing act.
Just realized I had muted myself. So thank you. No, that helps. And let me ask a couple of more questions, one to Olivia. And then let me just set up the question for Doug after this. I want to go more, Doug, I want to go more into SHREMS 2 and what you're seeing and whether or not you think Privacy Shield will be revived. And then Olivia, please tell us more of what you're seeing from your European, your UK perspective. We really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yes, I think there's I feel, and I think a lot of people are in flux because there's a lot of post-Brexit dealing with a lot of regulations. How much do we change from all the legislation that was with Europe before? Now in Brexit, what are we separating out? And people will do that certainly from a business perspective, and then they have to layer into that then the security and privacy issues. And so most people will know their business aspects, but the privacy and security they're having to learn. Maybe there's maybe there's an unintended benefit that everyone is in the same boat on that. But what I said before is something that is cropping up, is the personal data and the marketing of personal data to improve economic growth, how more companies can get into that bandwagon of economic growth. And then this starts to come into the technical giants who have a lot of platforms that smaller businesses are wanting to use, and those smaller platforms need to be thinking about the privacy aspects to use on those technical giants. And the technical giants, because we have in the UK too going on Competition and Markets Authority, that these technical giants are being faced with antitrust kinds of issues. Are they too big and only have their economic interests at play? And at what stage do their economic interests produce harm? And we have also going on an online harms bill that's going through Parliament to try to tackle with the unintended aspects of the abuse of data on that, the way, and then the role of intermediaries, which is something that a lot of people don't really understand, and I myself am also trying to get a better grip on it, is the people who create content. You know, are they the original publisher, or are you a platform that just reproduces what others are publishing? And so there's a whole gray area in there. And you have to bring in another expert to go into that, but that there's some interesting developments there. So, as it was said before by colleagues, it's very complex and multidisciplinary. I think, Mark, you were talking about that. It's a lot to get one's head around. And so I think having a team of different expertises sitting around the table to be able to talk through issues in a non-blame way to try to get the best for your organization. And everyone's struggling with resources, how do you do that? The role of MSSPs was talked about, but there's nothing new there in outsourcing expertise when you can't do it yourself. But, maybe get back into the social engineering aspect. Who are you bringing in? When you're downloading software from open source repositories, what else are you bringing in that? And there are a couple of vendors, white source, Sonatype, and others, who are trying who will offer you a service to try to work through some of those issues. So I think we have some of the same issues you have in the US, though. I think someone mentioned before, for the likes of Germany, there is a culture in Europe where privacy is taken, I don't want to say more seriously, but it's taken more to heart than perhaps in other countries around the world. So, look at what Germany does. That they have a history, so they want to prevent things from happening again. And there may be value in that. What we in the UK and in Europe are just going to be so confused as to what the United States is doing. So do we, if you're a company in Europe, whose privacy law is one going to use in the US? So, you have to look at your business and, is your product going, maybe you're only working to one state in the US, but if you're working across the US, do you have to check out all the different privacy nuances in each of the different states? So what can the US do to help businesses abroad in that regard? That might be a question that people would be interested to hear more about, pending a federal approach.
Thank you very much. And I want to get Soren in on this conversation in a minute too. But before I go to Doug, and I'll go to Soren next, I think, on this subject, let me get your thoughts, if you would, Olivia, because some believe that the Biden administration is going to be able to convince EU that Europe should recognize again Privacy Shield, that there's enough controls in there. And yet, when I look at the comments, I keep really seeing that Europe is saying, no, there's too much issues around the FISA, the surveillance. Any thoughts you have on that?
I think that's still a work in progress. And yes, because most of that, as I understand, the Privacy Shield is on the law enforcement side. And I think it was Robert or someone who said, I always thought, and please help me, someone, but from day one, if law enforcement needs to get your data for something, you get a warrant. So you have to turn it over for law enforcement, national security purposes. Yeah, I think that was it. If if Amazon is faced with a warrant from U.S. law enforcement, they're bound to turn over the data, right? And hence you're getting here. So is the data that they're turning over, is that going to be U.S. data, privacy data, or is it going to be, the data from their users in other countries? So that may be more of an issue in some way than the personal privacy, unless you're the bad guy, of course, because that's your personal data. And I think that kind of issue, the law enforcement side, is manageable. I mean, what I'm worried about, or what I hear people are worried about, is how industry has so much data and how that gets farmed out, and what is industry doing to protect your personal data, because that's where so many of the leaks are. I like to think I have more faith in, okay, there are leaks everywhere, but you know, if you're sailing close to the wind on something and law enforcement wants your data, they're going to find some way to get something, and the warrant is a usual way. But when companies are not protecting data as well as they could, then, you know, hence we have all these newspaper articles that Ted showed earlier. You know, companies are breaching data left, right, and center, and that's on, you know, on the dark web. I mean, anyone can use that. The criminals have their honeypot. I mean, well, the criminals have access to your data. I think one should be more worried about that than what law enforcement is able to do. That's an angle.
Good point. And with respect to that, I think several companies are getting concerned about, you know, the data that they have. Has it gone beyond the right retention period? You know, do they need to look at getting rid of excess data, you know, just in case they're breached, and just because it's the right thing to do, you know, per the requirements. So thank you. And
yes,
data
and I see.
Oh,
yeah,
ahead.
I see. Robert, you've put a comment in the chat. When you say raising the bar on methods and tools, right? I agree. So were you referring that to what companies are doing, or law enforcement?
Both, actually.
Yes.
Yeah, both.
Yes.
I mean, we live in a world, and actually this session we're having today, and the ones that the chapters put together in the past are a good example of that. It's continually changing, and the bar is being raised. You mentioned earlier, you know, just tick boxing firewalls. Wow, you know, that was that bar was the 20-year-old bar. We're well past that on what the bar is. Cyber insurance, I'm really looking forward to that series. They're already saying there's certain, if you don't take certain actions and you don't have certain things in place, then your insurance is going to be more expensive, or we won't cover the breach. And they're already saying we probably won't cover paying your ransomware payment if you decide to pay. So we're already seeing that and this has just been continuous over my entire history of decades. The bar is always raised, and if you do have a breach and it's found that you were using methods and tools from 20 years ago, you're likely to pay more fines. And because you didn't take due care. There's a standard of due care. What's the standard of due care? You know, what other companies, and especially leading companies, are doing. And that standard of due care is always rising. And we as professionals have to keep track of it. And I would suggest we're better off being ahead of the curve than being behind the curve.
Yes, and I think perhaps a hidden benefit of insurers asking all these questions is that it's not so much, oh, we have a breach, well, we'll get insurers to pay for it. It forces people to try to get their cyber hygiene in place, which is the last thing anyone wants to do. Yeah. So
I mean, my good friend and someone who worked with me at Symantec happens to be the CISO at SolarWinds. And he's done a very good job of dealing with the fallout from that particular problem. But I will tell you, it has sucked up a ton of their time and has a significant impact on their brand and revenue. And they've been able to mitigate much of that, but think of all the time and energy that was spent.
Yeah.
And I have to tell you, if you talk to other players that are software providers, for example, they would honestly say, but for the grace of God, there go I. They're not sure they would have been any better off if they had been the target. Similarly with what happened with Colonial Pipeline. You know, if you talk to other players in that industry, they have kind of the same comment, you know, but for the grace of God, there go I. In other words, we all know this could happen to us, and we could be the next one that's like that. And if there are things that can be done, and I can tell you, I've talked to his name's Tim Brown, the CISO at SolarWinds, I can tell you that many of the things that they are putting in place and have done over the last year and a half or so are impressive, and they have raised the bar. And they're working with the federal government, for example, on what the standards are for building software and for what it means to get it out there. That's going to raise the bar. Every one of these breaches ends up with the bar getting raised. And if we're just standing still, we're gonna miss the boat.
Yeah, I guess that's the traditional arms race approach, you know, between criminals and law enforcement, right?
It is. And you know, if you talk to most CISOs and CIOs, they will tell you that they feel like they're below water. You know, they were treading water, and now they feel like they're below water because the kind of resources that nation states and organized crime can throw at this is extraordinary. And we do need the help of government, most definitely. But on the positive side, there's tremendous innovation going on both methods and tools. And we need to look at adopting that innovation because it actually can help us save money. Doesn't necessarily have to cost more. It can actually be a better way of doing things. DevOps is a better way of doing things, building software, for example. And adopting DevSecOps, where we get involved, is a better way of doing things. And it will actually start to lead to cost savings while improving security. And there are many things that are like that. So we shouldn't always think of everything as we raise the bar just always costing more money. If some of these innovations actually have a tremendous impact on saving money.
And that goes back again to social engineering can cost little, and yet you've given away the credentials and crown jewels. Yeah.
And you know, really good social engineering where you've done tremendous research on individuals because you've got lots of money at your behest, or if you're a nation state, you have enough money to put essentially a spy into your organization. That's going to be tough. Yeah. But even so, if we follow things like separation of duties, where no single person has access to everything, if we especially pay attention to domain admins, we understand, even in those very difficult cases, how to limit, I'm not going to say eliminate, but how to limit and mitigate the damage that can be caused. And I think that's the name of the game. It isn't always completely avoid and eliminate. It's often mitigate and reduce what the damage can be and improve our ability to respond quickly so we don't have long dwell times and much bigger costs as a result of security events and breaches that hit us.
Thank you.
So Olivia, I'm going to make a comment on your warrant issue, if I may. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
So I was in the meeting after the terrorist attack in San Bernardino with about 100 cybersecurity professionals, the district attorney from there, and the person from Apple. And for those of you who don't remember this story, Apple refused to allow law enforcement to get the data from the person's phone who had gunned down everybody in that area. Okay. They wanted a backdoor. Law enforcement wanted a backdoor into the phone. About 50% of the cybersecurity people were on one side saying, if you create a backdoor, the hackers are going to go at it. And I don't disagree. About 50% of them wanted it. It was civil war. And I got to tell you, in the US, ex-cybersecurity people, including myself, we're all ex-military. I'm an ex-Marine Corps officer trained, a cyber experience, explosives, weapons, you name it, right? And that's a dangerous crowd to piss off. But the only thing that unlogjammed that were the Israelis jailbreaked that phone, and that eliminated the problem. Apple never actually gave them the data. So when you are looking at the way I've worked with the Germans in Berlin and the others on privacy data and others, the attitude with the US governments and corporations versus the way the Europeans, we are very, very different. I'm willing to help the ones that you know to navigate it, but our legal system, our corporate system, and our attitudes towards privacy do not match the Europeans at all. And frankly, and this might upset somebody, but I think our government surveillance post the Patriot Act is closer to the Chinese than the Europeans. And that, I'm sure, upsets the Europeans. Rightfully so.
I mean, Mark, that's a really good
Yeah.
point. I work a lot
Yeah.
with European companies as well, and I can tell you there is tremendous angst about using US cloud providers in Europe for all the reasons you just mentioned.
You know, I know a lot of the people who work in those three-letter organizations for the government, and I know a lot about how the data is stored and the data that's captured. I did the big data analytics at IBM, similar to what they do with Adobe and the ad tracking, et cetera. The data that's out there and the quantities of that data that is collected, stored, tracked by both the corporations and the government is a little frightening if you fully understand what's out there. So this is a privacy data discussion, and the Europeans would not, if the ones that do understand, like Schrems, Max Schrems, freaks out and goes to court, right? And changes it all, because if they truly understand, the Europeans would never accept what we do with data here, truthfully.
Yes, I understand what you're saying. And I've worked with some of those people that you've mentioned. So how, I mean, is there a way, you know, because there's so much data out there to be captured, that could be captured, et cetera, that there's the main issue is on analyzing and getting the right data to deal with, for example, particular court issues. So how you narrow that down so that you don't supposedly inadvertently see something you shouldn't be doing. Okay, and I know it's a gray area there. So
I'm going to make an unusual suggestion.
Okay.
Because I have multinationals, and I've told them to store their US data in EMEA, in Europe, because they'll deal with the European ones, and we have less of an issue with the data going the other way. And they were like, wow, that's an interesting suggestion. But if I try to store a German's data in here, I had a project where they wanted to store German data in China on this project. And I'm like, you've got to be kidding. And I talked to one of the lead DPO attorneys in Berlin, and you know, he's like, there's no chance, you know, we will roast you if you try to do that. But I've told some of my European multinationals, I don't think we have the same objections as US citizens to storing our data in Europe. Do we, Robert? What's your opinion of that? You're muted.
No, we don't, Mark, and that's actually pretty good advice. I mean, part of the challenge is if it is a US cloud provider, and this is where the angst starts to come, and you're using their European locations, that can certainly help. But I will tell you, there's still hesitancy and concern of European companies using the US cloud providers, even with the locations in Europe. And I'll also tell you, there is concern when moving to cloud of trying to use European cloud providers, which are not well known, and it tends to be many, many times the cost of using the US cloud providers, slowing down their ability to move to cloud. So the Europeans are a bit frustrated and would like more protection, which really has to be a move by the US government, from what I can tell, so that they can be assured that they're not going to get subpoenas that reach across, because it's a US company that controls that data, even though it's stored in Germany. They're worried about even those situations. Technically might meet GDPR and other regulations, but they still worry.
Good discussion. Very good discussion.
Yeah. Is there a trend then for cloud service providers to increase their services? You mentioned the European cloud service providers, Or is it that the US giants are just so big, no one
The
can compete
it's
with
the
them?
US giants, yeah, Olivia, it's the US giants
yeah.
providing many, many locations in Europe. It is not hard to use any one of the US cloud providers and ensure that the data stays in Europe. That's straightforward, it's done all the time. But it's still, the angst is it's still a US cloud provider. And that's where the angst comes. But I agree, Mark, no concerns that I am aware of for US companies to store all their data over in Europe, including about the US people. That it is a definite option and a way to go.
So I had a self-checkout project, essentially on a mobile app on a phone that was being deployed in a German entity. And so I actually said to them, they ended up using Azure Cloud and deploying all of the German data in Azure in Germany, where it stays in Germany and don't deal with cross-border. And, you know, it solved the problem. Now, I got called into that project because they didn't know what to do. And when I heard what they were doing, supposedly it was software that was going to store it in China, I kind of fell off my seat and said, I don't think so. You can't do that. But the customer was happy with that. Actually, it was I won't mention the German company for confidentiality reasons, but the German organization, and it's a very, very large one, and headquartered in Germany, was quite satisfied with that as the answer. You know, including one. There's a gentleman by the name of Nico Harting in Berlin, and if you're in a privacy meeting about GDPR, and there's 20 people, they ask the questions, all 19 will look at Nico to get the answer. So,
Mark, can I just see if I understood what you mentioned, that the data would be stored in German data stored in China, but using software?
No,
was it the data?
They wanted to, it was actually some equipment and application software that was developed in the Far East, and because it was developed over there, the company over there that was deploying it wanted to store the data at their entity in China, and we said to them no. So the data did not get stored in China; it got stored in Germany in an Azure cloud instance for this application. Because I told them no when they called me for a recommendation. I said no, you can't do that, and I also called Nico, because I had Nico on retainer for a while, and asked Nico, and Nico said acceptable. And this was for, I'll repeat, very, very large German entity, and their DPO signed off on it quite quickly, actually, that it was Azure in Germany, that the data stayed in Germany, and that was acceptable to them.
Great point, Mark. And just on China, you want to be very careful about that. I spent a lot of time. In fact, when I was CTO at Symantec, we did a Symantec Huawei, which you all know now very well, joint venture. So got to meet Ren Jianfei and know the Huawei folks fairly well. But I can tell you in the recent past, the last few years, I would not recommend storing any data.
Anything.
Any data, not even just confidential, any data in China, because of two reasons. One, by law, all of it has to be shared with the Chinese government. They do have privacy rules, but those rules don't include sharing with the Chinese government. So all emails, all communications, all data, everything gets shared. And in order to have the ability to store it there, the provider has to comply with those regulations. So hopefully that's pretty chilling to you. Secondly, if it's not even confidential data, but just operational data, the Great Firewall of China is working quite well. It's hard to get through now. It used to be quite easy when I would visit and I could get to things. Now the best way is to use AT&T or another US service provider, which they do have over there. But only expats, only foreigners can use those services, and you can get to our internet using your cellular service. You won't be able to get to it through the hotel or other places. Well, that means they can clamp that Great Firewall of China down at any time, and you will no longer have access to that data.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that. I am very skeptical of the Chinese privacy law because really the communist government owns everything, data. Therefore,
Yes.
what individual rights do you really get? You know, I have
Yes.
great skepticism to that. And
Yeah.
I've told people that, and they say maybe I'm jaded, but I've been doing this a long time. And, you know, I have seen some of the hacks. So I started in cyber before privacy, and some of the nation state attacks that I have seen are quite disturbing, right?
Yep. Well, all Chinese citizens as of a few years ago are required to spy for the government if the opportunity arises. So what that means is if you have employees there, partners there, et cetera, their first loyalty is to the Chinese government. It will not be to you. And it has to be. Otherwise, they're putting their very lives in jeopardy. So don't expect people to give loyalty to you first. They can't. And it's just the way it is. So you need to be very cautious about building software in China and about the nature of privacy. I mean, that being said, I think there's still tremendous business opportunity there, but you have to go in with eyes wide open that they have a different perspective than we do, which is that everything gets shared with the government. It doesn't necessarily get shared with other companies, and that's where the privacy part of the Chinese laws come into play. But everything will be shared with the government. The government can and deserves to know everything. That's their mentality.
And with so many, let's say, smaller or medium-sized companies always looking for a place to do business, as you say, China is a good place for many.
It is. It's great
to do
opportunity.
business, and
Yeah.
they're not really. Most are probably not even aware of the detail of what you've just gone through.
Yeah, if you go in eyes wide open, I have friends there. I've done a lot of business there. If you go in eyes wide open, there's great opportunity. But you got to go in knowing what the game is, and that these are their expectations. If you are comfortable with the kind of business you're doing with that reality, which they're not shy about saying that's the reality. It's not secret. There are ways to do business there, and there are ways to make money there. But where companies get in trouble is they don't go in eyes wide open, and they kind of assume it's like other countries and it is quite different. I would suggest, Mark, the only difference is with our, in some ways, the difference is our government collects information and we don't always know exactly what they're doing. The Chinese are very open. We're just going to collect it all. It's just the way it is.
I mean, what most people don't realize that haven't done multinational transactions like that is that it's also a completely different ethic structure. The Chinese are not Judeo-Christians. They have completely different ethics, and it's acceptable. I usually send people to kiss, bow, or shake hands. Have you ever read that?
No.
It's the
What's
Wharton
this?
School of Business. It's the Wharton School of Business, comes out most years, how to do business in 160 countries around the world.
Right.
So it's the little cheat sheets. So I did business in Cairo, and I'm married to a Brazilian, so I lived in Brazil, and I did stuff in Australia with Japanese, Koreans, Chinese, all these. And I would read the cheat sheets to help me before I get involved in any of these, because the world is not, I know there's an arrogance level of us Americans that the world, should be the same as we are, but it's not. And if you're not cognizant of, where you're going into multinational, but China is pretty frightening, actually. China sets a whole new, set of challenges because of how they're structured. And I would never store data there if I could avoid it, right? I just wouldn't. I'd be happy to store it in Germany. I trust the Germans on the data. How about you, Robert? You trust the Germans with the data?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with storing, if I were using cloud service, I would store it somewhere in the European Union. Germany has its own special rules, so it's not a bad choice because it lets you make sure.
Germans are really tough.
They're really tough, and they probably have the highest bar. So if you store it there, you're probably in pretty good shape for almost anywhere. And so, yeah, that's a pretty good choice. But the only exception to storing data in China is if you had a business located in China doing business just in China, you are going to have some data that.
Yeah, I think it's okay at that point. I think you have no choice.
Yeah, you don't want anything that is core to your operations outside of China or information about individuals who live outside of China stored in China if you can possibly avoid it.
But I suppose too, with we say the Germans are tough. That's like, they've experienced certain kind of history that has sharpened themselves up. So, that was like Citibank in the 80s, right? They were the Citigroup, right? They were one of the first that got cyber hit, and, stocks, share prices go down. And yet those are the types of entity that end up getting really tough and cyber hygiene really good because they've gone through a bad experience.
It was a compliment, Olivia. It was not a criticism.
I know. Oh no, I agree. I'm just extrapolating this to
it's
a more generic.
It's a more generic privacy. Yeah,
it's a more generic.
We're culturally moving that way ourselves, Olivia. It was not long ago where studies were done that people would give away almost any personal information asked for in order to get a free cup of coffee. And the majority of Americans were willing to do that. That is completely changed. We are becoming a society that is viewing privacy as more important. We are becoming more upset with instances where that privacy has been abused, either by big companies or by the government. And I think if we were to look at the direction, and as we come out of some of the recent experiences, I think the arrow is pointing to Americans becoming more and more concerned about privacy, not less. And that is a change, because we were headed the other direction not too long ago.
Yeah. Well, and because the US and Europe, we just have so much technology. We rely on it so much. You could argue that countries in many developing countries don't have so much. It's a little bit general point, but they have less IT infrastructure, so they might not be hit as much. Very general, because the level of knowledge is such. I believe that developing countries now, they have nothing that's safe, arguably. If they don't have the knowledge and capability, they don't have the knowledge to understand.
They will leapfrog, and that's the thing to look at. Just like they went straight to cell phones and avoided running telephone lines. You'll see the same thing happen on privacy. They'll go straight to some really good policies and emulate those when the time comes.
Well, I think we solved the world's problems.
Even without imbibing. Yes.
Wow. Olivia, we solved the world's problems. I'm connecting to you because I thought
I just asked the questions.
I just think we introduced a bunch of new world problems, but okay.
Yes, I know.
I want to
thank the same problems. They're just coming up in different ways. Yeah. Anyway, sorry, we're getting philosophical here.
New flavors, right?
Pardon?
No, this is good. I want to thank all of you panelists, all of you speakers. I think this has been a very good session today. It's a very good way to wrap up the year here. And I want to thank you again. And let's keep the conversation going and emails, etc. Maybe we'll get some surveys out. And we look forward to seeing you next year. Be safe. Thank you very much. Take care. God bless you.
Thanks,